Chapter 4:17. All the disciples in the sword sect pagoda clenched their teeth and suppressed the grief and indignation in their hearts. The limitless sword sect and other forces had shamelessly besieged them. Bai Zichen, Wang Xiaotian, and the others had retreated in humiliation. Ji Ling, Yuan Mia, and the others had fought a bloody battle but were still heavily injured in the end. All the grievances and humiliation from before seemed to have been released at this moment. All the inner court disciples roared with all their might as they looked at Yi Guchen. No matter how calm Yan Wushuang's temperament was, she could no longer hold back as tears fell from her eyes when she felt the loud roars that could topple mountains and overturn seas. This young girl who had always been as arrogant as a phoenix actually knelt on one knee in front of Yi Guchen with a plop. "Yi Guchen, I'm sorry for what I've done to you before. But now, I beg you." Yan Wushuang paused as she looked firmly at Yi Guchen with her red eyes. "Please draw your sword for our sword sect pagoda." All the shouts entered Yi Guchen's ears. He could feel the anger and humiliation of everyone in the sword sect pagoda. This was their roar from the bottom of their hearts. Yi Guchen looked at the young girl kneeling in front of him and nodded slightly. "Got it." Yi Guchen swung his hand and the Xianming heavy sword appeared in the air. Boom! The heavy sword smashed into the ground and sank deep into it as cracks spread out around it. The entire arena seemed to shake for a moment. For some reason, all the geniuses present felt that a shocking scene was about to happen. Seeing Yi Guchen take out the Xianming heavy sword, all the disciples of the sword sect pagoda cried tears of joy as the blood in their bodies surged. "Since I'm here today, we'll talk about the grudges from before after the exchange. But now, I want to seek justice for the sword sect pagoda." Yi Guchen shouted loudly and his voice spread throughout the entire arena. All the disciples of the sword sect pagoda were agitated and shed tears of excitement. In the end, Yi Guchen was the only one who could clear the name of the sword sect's tower. "Today, the sword sect's Yi Guchen is here. With a sword in hand, I will fight a bloody battle. I won't let anyone who attacks the sword sect's tower go." As soon as Yi Guchen finished speaking, he held the Netherese broadsword and directly attacked. "Ha, Yi Guchen, you are indeed as arrogant as the rumors say. You overestimate yourself. Today, let my demonic saber deal with you." Seeing this, Leng Zhu also wielded his demonic saber and attacked. "Yi Guchen, anyone can talk big. You were crippled before, so even if you survived, how much strength do you still have?" Xian Dai coldly smiled. She and Xian Feng looked at each other, and very tacitly attacked Yi Guchen. Did anyone in the martial arts arena see this? They were all watching the battle closely. This was because they knew that Yi Guchen was crippled. The reason why he could kill so many people in the Void Sword realm was because of the collision between the Mad Demon Burning Blood Elixir and the Exotic Thunder. However, now, even if Yi Guchen survived, how much strength could he have? This was the focus of everyone's attention. Previously, Yan Wushuang was in such a difficult situation under the siege of the three people. How much better would Yi Guchen be? "Let me help you." Yan Wushuang was about to attack. "You take care of Ji Ling and the others. Leave this to me." Yi Guchen's eyes were cold. Arrogant. Regardless of whether it was Leng Zhu or the black and white impermanence, when they heard Yi Guchen's words, they all shouted coldly. In their opinion, Yi Guchen was overestimating himself. Yi Guchen did not say much and directly used the soul-devouring secret skill. Boom! A roar came from Yi Guchen's body. The surrounding spiritual qi of heaven and earth gathered in Yi Guchen's body like rivers returning to the sea. Meanwhile, Yi Guchen's aura was also rising steadily. 7th transformation of the Divine Soul. 8th transformation of the Divine Soul. 9th transformation of the Divine Soul. Yi Guchen's aura had reached the peak of the 9th transformation of the Divine Soul. The abundant power in his body also made Yi Guchen's aura even stronger. Feeling the terrifying fluctuation of genuine qi, everyone in the fighting arena was in an uproar. Their eyes were filled with astonishment. Didn't they say that Yiguchen's genuine chi was crippled and that he could only use the mad demon burning blood elixir to explode with such combat strength? How does this look like a crippled genuine chi? It's even more vigorous than a genius with a 9th transformation of the divine soul. Yiguchen's aura at this moment shocked everyone. Xian Tai and the others narrowed their eyes. They originally wanted to kill Yiguchen. Now that Yiguchen's genuine chi had recovered again, the killing intent in their hearts was even stronger. Xian Hao stood at the top of the pyramid building. He looked at Yiguchen with a hint of astonishment. He did not understand how Yiguchen had escaped that death. Not only did he survive, but his genuine chi strength had also recovered. Facing the shocked gazes of the crowd, Yiguchen did not pay attention to them. There was only one thing he needed to do now, and that was to use the sword in his hand to seek justice for the people of the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest. Yiguchen slashed out with his sword, and a terrifying sword wave spread out in all directions. Void Sword Technique, 1,000 Waves. This terrifying sword wave spread out. Seeing this, Leng Zhu poured his genuine chi into the demonic saber. A cold saber chi shot out. On the other side, Xian Feng and Xian Dai attacked at the same time. Their sword momentum actually merged together. This was actually a set of sword techniques for two people to attack together. Facing the attacks of Leng Zhu and the black and white deities, Yiguchen did not have the slightest fear in his eyes. Today, he could not retreat. Taking a step back would be a blow to all the disciples of the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest. Therefore, Yiguchen had to win. Even if he had to spill his blood, he had to get first place. This was what Yiguchen should do as a disciple of the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest. Boom! When the moves collided, a terrifying shockwave spread out. The remaining two prodigies of the limitless sword sect joined forces and attacked from both sides. As for Murong Ditian, who had used the Mara sword to sneak attack Ji Ling, his eyes flickered. He did not rush forward immediately. Because he had experienced it before, he knew how terrifying Yiguchen was. Boom! Leng Zhu and the black and white deities both retreated. On the other hand, Yiguchen did not retreat at all. Again. Yiguchen comprehended the true essence of the edgeless sword intent. Although he had not completely comprehended the edgeless sword intent, he had already reached the entry level and could use it to increase the power of the void sword art. At this moment, Yiguchen's sword aura seemed to resonate with the void. The cheers of the disciples of the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest could still be heard. At this moment, Yiguchen seemed to have fallen into a state of epiphany. Ha, Yiguchen, are you courting death? Seeing this, Leng Zhu sneered. His demonic saber tore through the void again. The black and white deities also attacked at the same time. The two of them cooperated seamlessly. Two streaks of black and white sword chi shot out horizontally. Yiguchen's eyes were calm. Only extreme pressure could bring about extreme breakthroughs. Crack, the sound of glass breaking could be heard in Yiguchen's mind. At this moment, his void sword art had reached the highest level, the transformative stage. Void sword art, void 10,000 waves. Compared to before, a transparent sword wave that was 1,000 times more vigorous spread out from the Xianming heavy sword. It was as if it was going to break the void. The ferocious sword wave caused the void to tremble and the entire arena to tremble. With one sword, heaven and earth shook and the heavens were intimidated. Chapter 4:18. The ferocious sword wave seemed as though it was going to cause the void to boil. That powerful transparent wave with a strong vibrating force was like a broken dam, pouring out in all directions with a loud bang. It wasn't just Leng Zhu, the black and white depermanents, the two sky prides from the limitless sword sect, and Murong Ditian were all affected. Devil Saber 8 slashes, splitting the earth with a saber. When Leng Zhu saw Yiguchen's attack, his expression changed. Even though he was the head of the 3 sabers of the sealed Saber Monarch Hall, he still felt an immense pressure. He held the Devil Saber in his hand and slashed down. The ground cracked as the ferocious saber chi plowed out a deep crack. On the other side, Xian Feng and Xian Dai were also shocked by Yi Gu Chen's sword move. They unleashed all of their genuine qi and performed their most powerful sword moves. Scarlet Sun Sword Art. Yin Wind Sword Art. Xian Feng and Xian Dai executed their extreme yang and extreme yin sword moves respectively. On Xian Feng's sword, blazing sword radiance spread out like the sun. On the other hand, Xian Dai's sword radiated an extremely cold sword qi. Everywhere it passed, the void would be filled with frost. However, the most peculiar thing was that the two sword moves with different attributes merged together in the end. They formed a combination and their power multiplied. The other two sky prides from the Limitless Sword sect and Murong Ditian executed their powerful sword moves to defend against Yi Guchen's attack. Yi Guchen's myriad void ripple was extremely powerful. It was the ultimate move of a spirit-grade sword art and wasn't to be underestimated. Boom! When the various sword moves clashed together, shocking ripples exploded out. The ferocious aftershock spread across the entire arena. If it wasn't for the huge defensive array engraved under the arena, this attack would have turned the entire arena into a mess. PFFF. The two sky prides from the Limitless Sword sect Sun Moon Hall were sent flying while vomiting blood. They couldn't defend against Yi Guchen's myriad void ripple. Murong Ditian also continuously retreated as blood flowed out from the corner of his mouth. Leng Ju, as well as the black and white deities, were also hit by this powerful shockwave. They retreated rapidly, groaning in their chests. They felt that their internal organs were trembling violently, as if they had been displaced. On the other hand, Yi Guchen endured the attacks of many people. Although there was a trace of blood at the corner of his mouth, he did not retreat a single step. Because Yi Guchen had already made up his mind. Not only did he want to win, he wanted to win beautifully. Yi Guchen's attitude was that he would not take a step back. Yi Guchen held the Xianming heavy sword in his hand. His eyes were filled with the vicissitudes of life, and the blood that had lain dormant for a long time. It was a complete uproar. If life is a game of chess, I am willing to be a pawn. In the vast sea of people, who has seen me take a step back? Yi Guchen spoke softly. His voice was not loud, but it seemed to reach the ears of everyone in the arena. When everyone heard Yi Guchen's words, they clenched their fists tightly. They felt the blood in their bodies expand, and hot blood rushed to their heads. Life is like the sword sect, and one sword will sweep away all injustice. So handsome. When Gong Sun Xiaoya and some other girls saw the current Yi Guchen, it was as if they were looking at a fool. Under the pressure of Xian Tai's divine dwelling realm experts. Under the pressure of so many powerful enemies. Only Yi Guchen could still speak so boldly. This was not arrogance, but an unyielding pride that belonged only to the sword sect. You are too arrogant. Leng Ju's expression was somewhat ugly. He had previously said that Yi Guchen was still alive and would become a ghost under his blade. In the end, he, the black and white deities, and the other geniuses had joined forces, but they were still unable to suppress Yi Guchen. They could not even make him retreat. Yi Guchen, you are indeed arrogant. I don't believe that you won't even take a step back today. Xian Feng wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and drew his sword again. Xian Dai and Xian Feng's hearts were connected. They drew their swords at the same time. Their swords complemented each other and were extremely powerful. Demonic Blade Leng Ju also drew his sword again. Demonic Blade 8 slashes, second slash mountain. Two vigorous and sharp blade lights swept across the sky. In addition, Murong Ditian and the other two geniuses of the Limitless Sword sect also attacked at the same time. So many geniuses attacked at the same time. Their goal was not to defeat Yi Guchen, but to make him retreat. Looking at this absurd scene, some of the people from the major forces and many of the super clans were secretly shocked. The sword sect's Yi Guchen, whose true qi had been crippled, had actually grown to such an extent. Ah! Come on! When Yi Guchen saw this, not only did he not cower, but he also felt the blood in his body boiling. In the Saint Origin dynasty, how many people could enjoy the treatment of being surrounded by so many geniuses? Boom! Not only did Yiguchen execute the secret skill of spirit devouring, but he also executed the flawless Vajra body. Even though his flawless Vajra body had only transformed by 50%, its degree of toughness was far beyond the indestructible Vajra body. In addition to his own perfect body, Yiguchen's physical strength had already far surpassed those top-notch geniuses. Yiguchen slashed down with his Xianming heavy sword, releasing a violent sword wave once again. At the same time, Yiguchen extended his other hand and grasped the void. Golden true qi condensed into a golden longsword. The sword edge drew the trajectory of the great thousand world in the void and intertwined with each other. The ultimate move of the boundless heaven sword art, inescapable net. Two ultimate moves were executed by Yiguchen at the same time. This scene shocked everyone. Using two different ultimate moves of the sword Dao at the same time. What level has the sword sect's understanding of the sword reached? Among the spectators, there were a few sword Dao grandmasters. They were all shocked when they saw Yiguchen's dual sword divergent technique. Yiguchen rarely executed the dual sword divergent technique. This was one of his trump cards. Now that he had executed it, the crowd was shocked. Even those from the Limitless Sword sect were speechless at this moment. In their sect, there were not many people who could execute the spiritual level sword skill at the same time. Boom! 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 When the moves collided, the air waves surged and turned the world upside down. Yiguchen's physical body was under great pressure, but he still did not take a step back. On the other hand, Leng Zhu and the others coughed up blood again and retreated. Yiguchen's eyes flashed, and his figure flashed in front of the two geniuses from the Limitless Sword sect. What are you doing? There was a trace of panic in the eyes of the two geniuses from the Limitless Sword sect. As geniuses from the Sun Moon Hall, they were trembling like hamsters under the pressure of a wolf at this moment. When you attacked the disciples of the Sword Sect's Pagoda Forest, did you think this would happen? Yiguchen's eyes were cold, and his tone was indifferent. Feeling the hint of murderous intent in Yiguchen's words, the two geniuses' voices trembled. No. You can't kill us. This is the exchange. On the side of the Limitless Sword sect, Xian Tai's face darkened when he saw this. If the geniuses from the Sun Moon Hall lost too badly in the hands of Yiguchen, it would undoubtedly be a disgrace to him as the Sun Moon Hall master. Yiguchen, it's enough that you've done enough. If you go too far, it won't be good for anyone. Xian Tai snorted coldly. His voice condensed into a line, and with a wave of spiritual pressure, it was transmitted to Yiguchen's ears. Yiguchen's mind shook. If it were not for the meteorite demonic soul butterfly, his mind would have been damaged. Xian Tai, don't go overboard. Feng Manlu sensed that something was wrong and stepped forward to stop Xian Tai. Yiguchen ignored Xian Tai's threat. His eyes were extremely cold. Although he could not kill the two geniuses, it did not mean that they would not have to pay a price. Boom! Yiguchen's Xianming heavy sword swept out without holding back. Pfft! One of the geniuses from the Limitless Sword sect spat out blood and was sent flying. He landed heavily on the ground and fainted from his serious injuries. No! No! The other genius from the Limitless Sword sect turned around and wanted to run. Yiguchen also swung his sword across the sky and sent him flying. Then, he leaped into the air and stomped his foot. Boom! Yiguchen stepped on the heaven's favorite's chest like a divine king stepping on the earth. Accompanied by the cracking sound of his sternum, the genius from the Sun Moon Hall fell into the pit filled with cracks like a dead dog. The entire martial arts arena was deathly silent. Chapter 419. Everyone in the arena didn't even dare to breathe loudly. The person that Yiguchen was stepping on was the prodigy of the Limitless Sword sect's Sun Moon Hall. In the social gathering of the 7 major factions, there had never been a prodigy who had been defeated so miserably and was stepped on by someone else. This was undoubtedly a slap to the limitless sword sect's face. Not to mention that the Sun Moon Hall's hall master, Xian Tai, was still present. At this moment, some people secretly glanced at Xian Tai. Xian Tai was expressionless and didn't reveal any obvious anger. However, everyone could see that Xian Tai's eyes were as cold as an eternal ice abyss. Very good. Xian Tai didn't say much and only spat out 2 words coldly. However, this was even more chilling than cursing out loud. Ye Guqin didn't care about Xian Tai. He and the Limitless Sword sect were fated to be like fire and water. Since that was the case, why should he give them any face? Looking at the prodigy of the Sun Moon Hall who had collapsed at his feet, Ye Guqin didn't care. He turned to look at Murong Ditian. In the next moment, Ye Guqin executed the shadow step and pulled out an afterimage as he slashed his sword towards Murong Ditian. Seeing this, Murong Ditian's expression changed. He took out the Mara sword and executed his strongest move. Heaven Exhaustion Sword Art, Heaven Reaching Universe. Sharp sword chi gushed out from the Mara sword as if it could tear the air apart. However, Ye Guqin's expression didn't change at all. The current Murong Ditian didn't pose any threat to him. Swish! Ye Guqin executed the Shadow Kill Sword Art, Instant Kill. Although instant kill was seen through by others, they would be on guard. However, in the current situation, how could Murong Ditian distinguish the real person in front of him? Boom! The sharp sword chi pierced through Ye Guqin's figure and came out of his body. Swish! The golden sword edge carried sharp sword chi and caused Murong Ditian's back to feel a piercing pain. He tried his best to dodge, but Ye Guqin's sword still pierced through his shoulder. Ye Guqin's eyes were cold, as his true chi exploded forth, causing Murong Ditian's figure to be blasted backwards. Ye Guqin's figure flashed as he stepped forward. Puchi! Murong Ditian flew backwards like a kite with a broken string. A bloody hole appeared on his shoulder and one could even see the white bones within. Another prodigy of the Limitless Sword sect was defeated by Ye Guqin. Everyone's gaze turned towards the Limitless Sword sect's side. The originally cold and arrogant disciples of the Limitless Sword sect did not even dare to breathe loudly at this moment. Xian Tai's expression was even colder. This time, the Limitless Sword sect had lost a lot of face. Damn it, Ye Guqin, you are too arrogant. Xian Feng's expression was cold. Although he said this, there was a faint trace of extreme fear in his eyes. Ye Guqin's strength had far exceeded his expectations. As for the rest of the prodigies, they were also trembling because of Ye Guqin's strength. Next, it's your turn. Ye Guqin's tone was indifferent as he pointed his sword at the black and white impermanence and Lingju. Whoosh! He used wave-like subtle steps, and his figure was like smoke as he charged towards the 3 of them. God-slaying sword technique, 3 paths. A tyrannical blood-red sword chi spread out from the golden blade. As he drew his sword, 3 terrifying blood-colored sword rivers appeared. They were like the 3 paths of the Yellow Springs, and they followed the 3 of them to attack. Scarlet Sun Sword Technique, Heavenly Flame Explosion. Yin Wind Sword Technique, 9 Yin Howl. 8 slashes of Devil Blade, 3 slashes of the river. The 3 of them executed their strongest moves respectively. As the sword chi and blade light clashed, the surrounding air seemed to be compressed and then exploded, causing cracks to appear on the ground. Lingju and the black and white impermanence retreated once again. On the other hand, Ye Guqin still did not retreat a single step. Damn it! Lingju and the other 2's faces darkened. Although they were considered top prodigies, Ye Guqin's strength was even more terrifying. He was so powerful that they were extremely wary of him. If they were to join forces, wouldn't it be even worse if they were to fight alone? At the thought of this, the hearts of all the spectators trembled once again. At this moment, the other 2 of the 3 slashes also charged towards Ye Guqin. Ye Guqin, it's fine that you're not dead, but how dare you appear in this meeting so openly? Are you tired of living? Mo Ju Chen's gray hair fluttered in the wind as he held the sword burial blade with his only arm. His tone was extremely cold. He had a grudge against Yi Guqin for losing his arm, and it was already irreconcilable. Ha! Who can take the life of my sword sect? You? Yi Guqin raised his sword. It wasn't that he underestimated his opponent, or that he didn't care about his opponent. It was just that Mo Juqin didn't have the ability to fight against him. You're courting death. Mo Juqin immediately made his move. He poured his true energy into the sword burial blade, and a terrifying blood-red blade radiance tore through the air. Just as well. Let me have a taste of this legendary sword sect. Nialing also made his move. His blade seemed to be accompanied by the roar of 10,000 beasts as demonic aura surged into the sky. A cold light flashed across Ling Ju's eyes when he saw this. True energy surged into the demonic blade in his hand, and the spiritual rune array on it was activated. The demonic blade seemed to have awakened as a powerful demonic aura surged into the sky. The 3 slashes of the saber conferred Monarch Hall had joined forces. Xian Feng and Xian Dai also made their moves when they saw this. A total of 5 supreme prodigies attacked Yi Guqin from all directions at the same time. This scene caused an uproar in the entire arena. In the past, even top prodigies like Xian Hao and the Little War Emperor had never received such treatment. They had never been attacked by 5 supreme prodigies at the same time. Yi Guqin. Yan Wushuang, who had helped Ji Ling settle down, also had a hint of nervousness in her eyes. Facing such a lineup, even a top genius like her would have to avoid it. It would be difficult for her to face it head-on. As for the disciples of the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest, although they were extremely confident in Yi Guqin, the lineup before them really made them worry about Yi Guqin's situation. Yi Guqin, don't you know that the bird that sticks out gets shot? Let's see how miserable you will be in the end. Bai Zichen, who had retreated to the edge of the arena, thought coldly. He was already in such a sorry state. Naturally, he didn't want to see Yi Guqin turn the tide. Facing such a lineup, not only were the disciples of the Sword Sect Tower uneasy, but the other powers also felt the same. Because if it was Xian Hao and the Little War Emperor, they would have to avoid the 3 blades and the black and white impermanence. In their eyes, although Yi Guqin's strength had exceeded their expectations, he shouldn't be stronger than Xian Hao and the Little War Emperor. However, looking at the 5 people in front of him, Yi Guqin held the Xianming heavy sword in his hand horizontally. An extremely terrifying blood-red sword intent suddenly burst out. The Azura intent filled the entire arena. Everyone felt as if their necks were tightly gripped by a pair of hands. God-slaying sword art. Yama. Accompanied by a cold whisper, it was as if it was the whisper of Yama from hell. A terrifying blood-red figure rose from the ground behind Yi Guqin. Yi Guqin swung his sword horizontally. It was as if Yama had swung his sword and killed all living things. Chapter 420. The 5th form of the God-slaying sword art was already one of Yi Guqin's trump cards. Furthermore, the Shura sword intent boosted the God-slaying sword art. Therefore, at that moment, Yi Guqin's sword strike was extremely powerful. The blood-red Yama behind him seemed to be one with Yi Guqin's body. As Yi Guqin drew his sword, the crimson Yama drew his sword as well. The moment the sword appeared, the entire world seemed to reflect a blood-red radiance. Yi Guqin's sword and 3 blades collided with the black and white impermanence's attack. Boom! An earth-shattering explosion shook the heavens and the earth. Endless dust and air ripples swept out in all directions. Even the pyramid building was faintly trembling. Ling Ju, Nia Ling, Mo Juechen, Xian Feng, and Xian Dai were sent flying in the midst of the blood-red sword light. On the other side, Yi Guqin's bones crackled and many wounds appeared on his body. However, Yi Guqin still endured the terrifying shockwaves without taking a single step back. This was the pride of the sword sect. He couldn't be bothered to take a single step back. Whoosh! Yi Guqin used the shadow steps and left afterimages in his wake. He arrived in front of Mo Juechen and swung the Xianming heavy sword with a cold gaze. Mo Juechen gritted his teeth and dripped a drop of essence blood on the burial sword saber. The overflowing blood light made the entire saber exude a dense bloody aura. Blood Sky Returning Dragon Slash. Mo Juechen used all the true chi in his body and unleashed all his strength. He slashed out with his saber and a terrifying blood-red aura roared out like a blood dragon. Yi Guchen's other hand held the long sword made of true chi. The tip of the sword curved like a circle that could encompass everything. This was the Taiji sword art. Boom! Mo Juechen's attack was completely absorbed into the circle. However, Yi Guchen's hand that was holding onto his sword was slightly cracked and blood was flowing out of it. Bang! Yi Guchen flipped his hand and the blood dragon blade aura, which had been absorbed into the Taiji circle, shot out once again and struck Mo Juechen's chest. Puchi! Blood spurted out of Mo Juechen's body as he was sent flying and crashed to the ground. Yi Guchen didn't stop. He flashed in front of Nialing again. Nialing's expression changed drastically when he saw this, and he retreated explosively. He knew that he was no match for Yi Guchen at the moment. In the Void Sword realm, Yi Guchen had lost all his genuine chi and was looked down upon by him. Now, Yi Guchen was so powerful that he almost lost his will to fight. Retreat. The only thought in Nialing's mind was to retreat from this battle arena. However, would it be that simple? Yi Guchen had said that he wouldn't easily let off anyone who attacked the Sword Sex Pagoda Forest. In the blink of an eye, Yi Guchen's pitch-black eyes were swallowed by the color of blood. It was a pair of eyes that seemed to contain an Azura blood sea. Eye of Azura, activate. Countless Azura illusions appeared in Nialing's mind. He had broken through to the divine soul realm and possessed a spiritual sea that was far stronger than ordinary people's. With the help of the meteorite butterfly, Yi Guchen's spiritual illusory technique became even more powerful and deadly. The cruel illusions released by the Eye of Azura made Nialing lose his mind. His head hurt so much that it felt like it was going to split open. Boom! Yi Guchen didn't hold back at all. His heavy sword smashed into Nialing's body, and the latter's body fell heavily to the ground. Cracks spread out around him as he collapsed into the pit. Then, Yi Guchen didn't stop and charged toward Lingju again. Yi Guchen, don't be so arrogant. The two of them can't compare to me. Lingju said coldly when he saw Yi Guchen charging toward him. In my eyes, they're all the same. Yi Guchen's tone was calm. Arrogant. Lingju's genuine chi poured into the demonic saber in his hand. A spiritual rune array was activated once again. The demonic saber suddenly emitted an even more vigorous demonic aura. At the same time, a terrifying aura of sharpness spread out from the saber. Oh, an upper-grade mystical weapon? Yi Guchen looked at it and knew what it was. Lingju was obviously lucky to have obtained an upper-grade mystical weapon from somewhere. In the Saint Origin dynasty, it was almost impossible for a Heaven's Tribulation divine weapon to appear. Supreme-grade mystical weapons like the Blood Prison Sword and the Heavenly Demon General Armor were extremely rare. Therefore, superior-grade mystical rune divine weapons had instead become rare divine weapons. I obtained this demonic saber from a cave. At the same time, I also obtained the demonic saber 8 slashes, a lower-grade king saber technique. I, Lingju, am destined to become the king of sabers. You're just a stumbling block. Genuine chi exploded from Lingju's body as he slashed out with the demonic saber. Demonic saber 8 slashes, 4 sabers splitting waves. Lingju slashed out 4 times consecutively. Each slash was powerful enough to kill an expert in the 5th transformation of the Divine Soul realm. However, Yi Guchen's expression remained indifferent. He struck out with his sword again, and at the same time, the purple lightning of the netherworld surged out. Lightning brilliance of the 9 heavens. The violent lightning and sword chi instantly tore apart Lingju's saber. This was the ultimate move of the horizontal lightning sword. With Yi Guchen's current comprehension and strength, it was naturally easy for him to execute it. Poof! Lingju spat out a mouthful of blood. However, Yiguchen continued to charge forward and slashed out with his sword. Poof! Leng Ju spat out another mouthful of blood. Yiguchen clenched his fist. Boundless purple lightning surged out from his arm and shot toward Leng Ju. Cough! Leng Ju spat out a mouthful of blood mixed with his shattered organs. His chest was charred black as his body crashed into the pyramid behind him. At this point, the 3 sabers of the sealed Saber Monarch Palace had all been defeated. There was no commotion in the arena. Instead, there was an eerie silence. The 3 sabers of the sealed Saber Monarch Palace were the strongest apart from Saber Maniac, who was ranked first on the Sky Saber list. However, they had been defeated in such a manner. Leng Ju and the others might not have fought with their lives on the line. However, Yiguchen had also not revealed all of his trump cards. Therefore, this battle had already revealed a lot of problems. Yubu Fan's gaze was slightly complicated as he looked at the scene. His gaze once again fell onto Feng Manlu. Feng Manlu, I finally know who you have chosen. However, although Yiguchen is strong, my disciple, Gu Zun, is not weak either. Yubu Fan shook his head slightly. Only he knew that Gu Zun had fought with Leng Ju before. Only Gu Zun, Leng Ju, and Yubu Fan knew the result of that battle. Gu Zun had defeated Leng Ju with just 1 slash. This was why Yubu Fan was so confident that Gu Zun was the #1 Saber Dao expert among the younger generation in the Saint Origin dynasty. No one understood the saber better than Gu Zun. Similarly, no one understood the sword better than Yiguchen. The battle at the Forbidden City Summit is going to be interesting. Yubu Fan thought to himself. Everyone was still immersed in Yiguchen's victory over the 3 sabers. Yiguchen's cold gaze shifted to Xian Feng and Xian Dai. Next, it's the 2 of you. Yiguchen's indifferent tone made Xian Feng and Xian Dai's faces turn ugly. His tone did not sound like a challenge, but a casual sweep. Could it be that Yiguchen is going to crush all the geniuses of the other forces by himself? Seeing Yiguchen's action, the tens of thousands of spectators in the fighting arena widened their eyes. The shock in their eyes could not disappear. The astonished noise was like a tidal wave that surged through the entire arena. Today, no one could compare to the Sword Sect. Even more arrogant. Chapter 421. Feeling the coldness in Yiguchen's eyes, Xian Feng and Xian Dai's faces were a little ugly. They finally knew why Xian Hao was in such a sorry state in the Void Sword realm. It was not because Xian Hao was weak. It was because his opponent, Yiguchen, was too strong. Yiguchen, do you really want to completely anger my limitless sword sect? Xian Dai's pretty face was a little embarrassed. With their usual strength, they did not even bother to use the limitless sword sect. But now, if they were really crushed by Yiguchen in front of everyone, their reputation as the Black and White Impermanents would fall by more than half. Don't you think it's ridiculous to say this now? Yiguchen did not leave any leeway. His will would not be easily shaken by others. Without the slightest hesitation, Yiguchen took a step forward and his body seemed to teleport. In the blink of an eye, he swept in front of Xian Feng and Xian Dai. Yiguchen, each of us taking a step back is giving you face. Do you really think you are invincible? Seeing that Yiguchen did not have the slightest intention of backing down, Xian Feng shouted coldly. He and Xian Dai attacked again, and this time, the power of the sword was stronger than before. Sacred Sun Sword Technique, Scorching Sun Strike. Xian Feng's body surged with genuine qi, with a blazing aura, like the sun. He slashed out with his sword, and the blazing sword light was as dazzling as the sun, with a strong fluctuation of sword qi. Xian Dai also used her trump card. New Moon Sword Technique, Full Moon Hook. Xian Dai was wearing a black dress, which outlined her slim figure. She pointed out with her sword, and the sword light was like a crescent moon, with a very clever arc, attacking Yiguchen from the side. If Xian Feng's sword was like the sun, breaking through everything, Xian Dai was like a poisonous snake in the dark, attacking from the side. The cooperation between the two could be said to be seamless. The Saint Sun Sword Codex and the New Moon Sword Codex are the lower-grade king-level sword techniques in the Limitless Sword sect, second only to the Limitless Sword technique. What's even more commendable is that these two sword techniques are a combination sword technique. If they are used together, their power is comparable to a middle-grade king-level sword technique. The black and white deities of impermanence were also famous geniuses. Therefore, their trump cards were well known by everyone. Seeing them display their trump cards, the spectators in the fighting arena were all surprised. Facing the attacks of the two, Yi Guqin's expression remained calm. His Xianming heavy sword swept out and met Xian Feng's attack. Then, with a flick of his other hand, the six-pulse divine sword qi spread out and turned into rays of finger light that swept towards Xian Dai. Boom! 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 Sword light and qi radiance shot out in all directions like dazzling flowers. Xian Feng closed in and attacked. His swordsmanship had a kind of yang like the sun, and it was straightforward. However, Yi Guqin, who was holding the Xianming heavy sword, was obviously stronger than Xian Feng. In his mind, he silently comprehended the true essence of the edgeless sword essence. Gradually, he no longer displayed a certain sword technique. Instead, he chopped, slashed, cut, and other basic sword techniques. As he unleashed his simple sword aura, waves of terrifying shockwaves spread out with a loud bang. The edgeless sword essence was not focused on the sharpness of the sword, but on the power of the shock and destruction of Mount Tai. Damn it, what kind of sword technique is this? Xian Feng's face was ugly. Facing Yi Guqin, he felt as if he was facing Mount Tai. It was as if he was under great pressure. When Yi Guqin displayed this technique, some ordinary experts present couldn't feel anything, but some experts who were deeply immersed in the sword Dao, as well as divine-dwelling experts, could clearly feel that a powerful sword intent seemed to be brewing in Yi Guqin's body. This child's talent in the sword Dao is really amazing. Xian Tai's voice was indifferent. Although Yi Guqin had completely aroused his killing intent, even a divine-dwelling expert like him had to admit that Yi Guqin's talent in the sword Dao was amazing. On the other side, the corners of Feng Manlu's mouth curved in a smile. Yi Guqin had never let him down. The other divine-dwelling experts present also felt the sword intent that Yi Guqin was brewing. It should be said that Yi Guqin was already an expert with 2 sword intents. If he comprehended another sword intent, he would have 3 sword intents. With such talent, let alone the Saint Origin Empire, even in the entire Nantian region, he could be regarded as one of the top sword Dao heaven prides. Saint Sun Sword Codex, 10 Sun's Brilliant Sun. Xian Feng's entire body erupted with true qi, surging into the sword in his hand. How could he be willing to be Yi Guqin's sword test stone? Accompanied by his attack, there seemed to be 10 blazing sword rays appearing, like 10 suns in the sky. This was one of the most powerful killing moves in the Saint Sun Sword Codex. New Moon Sword Codex, Blood Crescent Moon. Xian Dai also didn't dare to hide her strength. She cooperated with Xian Feng and swung her sword. The sword edge cut through the void, carrying a crescent-like arc. It was just that the sword light was blood red and looked like a blood moon. Swoosh! As the black and white impermanence's ultimate moves erupted, the surrounding air screamed, and true qi boiled and spread out. In the face of the two's joint attack, Yi Guqin's face was calm. He held the Xianming heavy sword in one hand and comprehended the edgeless sword essence, displaying the 10,000 ripples of the void. On the other hand, he condensed his true qi into a sword, supported by the Azura sword essence, and displayed the 4th move of the god-slaying sword technique, 3 roads. Only Yi Guqin could use 2 different sword essences and display 2 different sword techniques at the same time. This was all thanks to his dual sword technique. Boom! When the sword edges collided, the sword rays intersected, and true qi surged. The strong impact of the impact overturned the surrounding ground. Yi Guqin's feet were still rooted to the ground, and he didn't take a step back. Xian Feng and Xian Dai both retreated once again, coughing up blood. Although they were top geniuses, even Xian Hao couldn't ignore them when they worked together. However, Yi Guqian was able to wield two swords at once. It was as if there were two people at the same time. Moreover, even if the two of them were connected, how could they compare to Yi Guqian's thoughts? So this time, the black and white impermanence, lost. Looking at the black and white impermanence coughing up blood, the entire arena fell into silence. First, it was the saber conferred King Palace's 3 blades. The black and white impermanence were behind them. Was there really not a single prodigy who could stop the sword grandmaster today? Brother Feng, we can still fight. Xian Dai was unwilling to accept this. She was proud and arrogant, so how could she swallow this? Forget it. Although we still have some trump cards, Yi Guqian hasn't really tried his best. Moreover, Xian Hao hasn't made a move yet. Why should we fight the sword master to the death? Xian Feng whispered, his eyes flickering. Well, we'll let the sword master go today. Xian Dai snorted. Her tone was as if she had defeated Yi Guqian and let him go. Looking at the black and white impermanence retreating, Yi Guqian ignored them. He turned his gaze to the Shen Yuan Academy again. Yuan Mia was covered in blood and looked quite miserable. Yi Guqian's eyes were indifferent as he walked over. On the Shen Yuan Academy's side, the expressions of Princess Yuan Shi and the others suddenly changed. Chapter 422. Fang Chen, in particular, looked at Yi Guqian with a touch of fear in his eyes. Yi Guqian had already cast a huge shadow on Fang Chen back in the Void Sword realm. Especially when Yi Guqian had triggered the lightning tide of annihilation, Fang Chen had risked his life to escape with Prince Yuani. Fang Chen would never forget that nightmarish scene for the rest of his life. Fang Chen was extremely nervous when he saw Yi Guqian facing them. All the spectators were speechless when they saw Yi Guqian targeting Saint Origin Academy again. First, he had defeated the saber-conferred Monarch Hall 3 times, then crushed the black and white impermanence of the Limitless Sword sect. Now, he was facing Saint Origin Academy again. Could it be that the Sword sect is really going to sweep through the geniuses of all the other forces with a single strike today? Many people thought so. Prime Sovereign Saber Maniac and the young War Emperor hadn't arrived yet. LV Qinghan, Xian Hao, Zhou Tong, and the others hadn't made a move yet. How many people could contend with Yi Guqian now? On Saint Origin Academy's side, Princess Yuan Shi snorted coldly when she saw this. Her expression was a little unnatural. Before the start of the exchange, both Princess Yuan Shi and Mo Langia had looked at Yi Guqian with disdain. Because to them, they could say whatever they wanted about a dead person. In any case, they wouldn't have to pay any price. But now, Yi Guqian had appeared in front of them. Not only that, but he had also defeated everyone. The saber-conferred Monarch Hall and the Limitless Sword sect's geniuses couldn't stop Sword sect. And now, Yi Guqian was pointing his spear at them. You don't have to care about my business. Yuan Mie said coldly when he saw Yi Guqian arrive. He didn't appreciate his kindness. He was a lone wolf walking in the night. He had no companions and didn't need friends. To Yuan Mie, life was a cruel journey and endless revenge. His only goal was to kill Crown Prince Yuani and the Empress to avenge his mother. Back then in the heavenly wasteland plains, Xia Yubing and the others worked together to hunt me down. You opened up a path for me with a single sword strike. Now, I'm returning the favor with a single sword strike. Yi Guqian's tone was similarly calm. He didn't want to become friends with Yuan Mie because he knew that a person like Yuan Mie wouldn't have friends. He just didn't want to owe anyone a favor. Yi Guqian remembered how Xia Shishir had casually helped him out in the beginning, and he eventually returned the favor. Not to mention the favor of Yuan Mie's sword. Back then, I just wanted to use you to deal with Prince Yuani. Yuan Mie's tone was still indifferent, but there was a hint of complicated emotions in his eyes. I only recognize the results, and I'll only return you a sword strike, Yi Guqian said calmly. Yi Guqian, aren't you looking down on us a little too much? Do you think you can beat us back with a single sword strike? Queen Yuan, she bit her red lips with her pearly white teeth. She was a little embarrassed to be looked down upon by Yi Guqin. But she didn't dare to say anything harsh because Yi Guqin's domineering way of sweeping away everything had completely stunned her. Thinking back, Queen Yuan, she didn't quite believe what Fang Chen had said before. After all, killing 100 people with a single sword strike and destroying the Thunder Tide wasn't something that a divine soul realm cultivator could do. So Queen Yuan, she also thought that it was a false rumor and an exaggeration. But now, seeing was believing, and Queen Yuan, she couldn't help but doubt it. There really was someone as outstanding as Yi Guqin in the world. At this moment, Mo Langya was furious when he heard Yi Guqin's words. He really couldn't hold it in and said coldly, Yi Guqin, although you're a sword master, you're too arrogant. You want to beat the three of us with a single sword strike? Who do you think you are? Although Mo Langya knew that Yi Guqin was extremely powerful, his arrogant and unruly character was unable to swallow his anger. That was why he spoke up. Yi Guqin's eyes were indifferent. He really wasn't interested in the geniuses of St. Origin Academy. Because most of the people in St. Origin Academy were nobles, princes, and princesses. They were all flowers in a greenhouse. Apart from Yuan Mia, the others, such as Prince Yuanyi and Princess Yuan Shi, all relied on abundant cultivation resources and various divine weapons and dharma artifacts to obtain the title of elites. Such geniuses who relied on resources and divine weapons were weaker than other forces and couldn't arouse Yi Guqin's interest at all. This sword strike is too much for you. Yi Guqin didn't say anything else and formed the Shura sword will. It was still the god-slaying sword technique, Yama's sword. This move had killed 100 people with a single sword strike and repelled 3 blades and the black and white impermanence. It was a waste to use it against Queen Yuan Shi and the others. Yi Guqin, you're too presumptuous. Queen Yuan, she shouted angrily. No matter how afraid she was of Yi Guqin, she was furious when she heard Yi Guqin's words. She took out a pair of golden rings, the edges of which were extremely sharp. As the golden rings spun, the air seemed to be torn apart. The light of the spiritual rune formation flashed on the golden rings. It was obviously a high-grade divine weapon with spiritual runes. Mo Langya was even more unconvinced. His genuine chi surged, and the blood-red spear in his hand shone with a terrifying bloody light. Yi Guqin, let me see how arrogant you are. Mo Langya was extremely unconvinced of Yi Guqin. Now that he had the chance, he attacked with all his might. However, boom! Yama's sword was not easy to block. Even though Queen Yuan Shi and Mo Langya were prepared, they still felt a terrifying killing intent when they faced the sword strike. It was as if it was going to shatter their hearts and souls. Fang Chen retreated quickly, without a trace of fighting spirit in his heart. Puff! There was no suspense. Both Queen Yuan Shi and Mo Langya were sent flying, spitting red blood from their mouths. Yi Guqin's footsteps flashed. His eyes were calm as he stepped towards Mo Langya. Yi Guqin, how dare you? On the spectator's stand, the leader of St. Origin Academy, Hun Tianho, shouted angrily. Hun Tianho, your threat is against the rules of the exchange, Deputy Sect Master Qing Yang of the 9 Profound Sect said. Boom! As if he did not hear Hun Tianho's threat, Yi Guqin stomped on Mo Langya's chest. Yi Guqin's foot cracked the blood armor on his body. One should know how strong Yi Guqin's physical strength was. It was far superior to those of the same level. Puff! Mo Langya felt that his internal organs were about to be shattered, and he spat out another mouthful of blood. Bang! Mo Langya was stomped into a deep pit, his blood-stained body twitching. Yi Guqin's expression did not change, and he turned to Queen Yuan Shi again. Seeing this, Queen Yuan Shi turned pale and shouted, I am the Queen of St. Origin Dynasty. You can't treat me like this. Yi Guqin, you should know the status of the Queen. Don't be so presumptuous. Hun Tianho could no longer bear it, and his voice boomed like thunder. The young Marquis was already humiliated to be trampled by Yi Guqin like this. If a princess was trampled on by Yi Gu-chen in front of so many people, how would the royal family be able to maintain their dignity? Is status that important? Even if you are the queen of a country, you will face the same fate if you offend a disciple of the sword sect. Yi Gu-chen ignored Hun Tianho, and pressed down on Queen Yuan Shi. No. Queen Yuan Shi's eyes were filled with hatred. However, she still could not resist, and she followed in Mo Langya's footsteps, being stomped to the ground by Yi Gu-chen. This noble and arrogant queen was now in a sorry state, lying paralyzed in a deep pit, her golden dress stained with blood. Everyone present felt a chill in their hearts. Chapter 423. Empress Yuan Shi was the daughter of the Yuan Emperor, the emperor of the Saint Yuan dynasty. The Saint Yuan dynasty not only had a strong foundation, but it had also given birth to a force like the Saint Yuan Academy. As for the other forces, although they weren't particularly afraid of the Saint Yuan dynasty, they generally wouldn't provoke them. Even if they did, they wouldn't go too far. After all, they were rooted in someone else's territory, and they still needed to show respect. But Yi Gu-chen didn't care about Empress Yuan Shi's noble identity and directly trampled her to the ground like the others. Such boldness wasn't something that ordinary people could possess. The hearts of the disciples of the Sword Sect's tower were beating wildly, and their faces were flushed red with excitement. This was because they knew that Yi Gu-chen's tyrannical action was to seek justice for the Sword Sect's tower. As Yi Gu-chen had said before, no matter who you were, as long as you provoked the Sword Sect's tower, this would be your end. Yi Gu-chen, how dare you? Hun Tianho's aura sword, and the unparalleled pressure of a divine-dwelling expert, as well as the spirit pressure of a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood, blasted towards Yi Gu-chen. As a marquis of the divine-dwelling stage in the Saint Origin Empire, Hun Tianho's murderous aura wasn't something ordinary people could withstand. However, in the face of such an imposing aura, Yi Gu-chen frowned coldly. The Azura sword intent erupted with terrifying murderous intent that wasn't any weaker than Hun Tianho's. It was just that Hun Tianho's powerful aura made Yi Gu-chen's body creak, but he still didn't take a single step back. Hun Tianho, do you think I don't exist? Feng Manlu took a step forward, flicked his sleeve, and dissolved Hun Tianho's pressure. Hovering in the air, Hun Tianho looked down at Yi Gu-chen and said coldly, Feng Manlu, you'd better warn Yi Gu-chen that he's hot-blooded, but too much will easily break. Okay. Feng Manlu nodded. Lord Feng Manlu. Many disciples of the Sword Sect's tower, and even some elders, wanted to say something, but hesitated. Yi Gu-chen, listen to me, Feng Manlu said calmly. Yi Gu-chen frowned slightly, but his expression did not change. Uncle Feng. Yen Wushuang bit her red lips. She did not believe that Feng Manlu would compromise with Hun Tian. Even if Feng Manlu's cultivation had fallen to the spiritual bridge stage, the pride of a Sword King wouldn't crumble so easily. Could it be that the Wind Sword King is going to compromise with the Sword Sect? I think it's possible. After all, the former obscure Sword King is only at the spirit bridge of heaven and earth stage, which is far from the divine dwelling stage. Many people sighed. As for what Feng Manlu had said about the divine dwelling stage, they naturally did not take it to heart. Humph, that's more like it. Huan Tianho coldly snorted. Just when everyone thought that Wind's sweeping tower would be pressured by the limitless Sword Sect, Saint Origin Academy, and other forces, Yi Gu-chen would restrain himself. However, Feng Manlu said calmly, Yi Gu-chen, feel free to make your move during this exchange, as for the rest, I, Feng Manlu, will shoulder it. Feng Manlu stood in the air with his hands behind his back. His body was like a divine sword. His handsome face was incomparably calm, as if he was saying something insignificant. A gust of wind blew over, brushing the black hair in front of Feng Manlu's forehead. His pair of blind eyes, however, seemed to be hiding a light that looked down on the world. Lord Feng Manlu. The eyes of many disciples of the Sword Sect Pagoda turned red. After the battle with Yu Bufan, Feng Manlu had been secretly attacked by an unknown expert and had fallen to the spiritual bridge stage. The sword sect pagoda had been in closed-door cultivation for 10 years. But now, when Feng Manlu said that he would shoulder it, everyone in the sword sect pagoda seemed to see the high-spirited obscure sword king, who had once shaken the world, return. Feng Manlu, you. Huan Tianho's aura surged, and his eyes were extremely cold. You can make a move if you want, but you have to wait until after the exchange, Feng Manlu said indifferently. That's right, Huan Tianho. We are still in the midst of the exchange. Sect Master Qingyang stood out. Let's wait until after the exchange, Yu Bufan said with a sigh. Humph. Huan Tianho snorted when he saw Sect Master Qingyang and Yu Bufan stand out. He secretly exchanged glances with Xian Tai, Grandma Shichuan, Yan Emperor, and the others. They understood each other's intentions. Whether it was Yi Guqin or Feng Manlu, they would not let them off easily. After the exchange, there would definitely be a conflict. Yi Guqin looked coldly at Queen Yuan Shi, who was under his feet. He stepped over her. You. Princess Yuan Shi was so angry that she almost vomited blood. She was the princess of a dynasty, but she had been stepped over like a stepping stone. This kind of humiliation was absolutely unacceptable to the proud and arrogant Princess Yuan Shi. Yi Guqin, just you wait. I will definitely make you kneel before me like a dog in the future. Princess Yuan Shi screamed, her beautiful face full of resentment. Yi Guqin ignored her. If this was not the exchange, he would definitely let Princess Yuan Shi know what it meant to say that trouble comes from a loose tongue. Yi Guqin glanced around and saw Fang Chen, who had a look of fear on his face. He ignored him and turned to look at Zither Fairy, whose clothes were stained with blood. He then looked at Ren Tingting. Without the slightest hesitation, Yi Guqin flashed forward. Are you all right? Yi Guqin looked at the peerless beauty in pink clothes in front of him and asked calmly. I'm fine. As long as you are well, I'm fine. Seeing the figure that she had been thinking about day and night land in front of her, Zither Fairy's eyes were filled with joy and her face blushed. Not far away, Zhou Tong looked at this scene indifferently, a dark shadow gathering in his eyes. I'm sorry. The sect has to keep the news that I'm alive a secret, so. Yi Guqin said apologetically. I understand. Zither Fairy wiped the blood from the corner of her mouth, her breath weak. Yi Guqin's eyes darkened. He could see that Zither Fairy was seriously injured. The person who attacked Zither Fairy did not hold back at all. Yi Guqin looked at Ren Tingting with his cold, dark eyes. Yi Guqin, what are you doing? We have no grudge against each other. Although Ren Tingting was also a prodigy in the 9 transformations divine soul realm, after seeing Yi Guqin's ferocity, she no longer had any confidence. Seeing Yi Guqin's cold eyes looking at her, she felt a little guilty. Previously, because of her relationship with Zhou Tong, she had slandered Yi Guqin to the extreme, and all kinds of dirty words came out of her mouth. Mr. Yi, why don't we both take a step back? A figure dressed in white arrived, her voice clear like a waterfall. It was LV Qinghan. She did not like Ren Tingting attacking Zither Fairy. However, Ren Tingting was from Consonance Palace, and she was a top prodigy in Consonance Palace. If Yi Guqin targeted Zither Fairy, it would be unreasonable if she did not stop him. Looking at the beautiful figure in front of him, Yi Guqin's eyes were calm. I said that we will meet again. But if you stop me, our meeting will turn into a clash of swords, Yi Guqin said slowly. LV Qinghan was stunned. Then, as if she thought of something, she froze on the spot. You are. LV Qinghan had always been cold, but at this moment, she could not hide the surprise in her eyes. The surprise that Yi Guqin brought to her was too great. Chapter 424. Others might not know what Yi Guqin meant by this sentence. But LV Qinghan knew. Back at the gem forging building, when she invited the young man with the bamboo hat, that young man said that they would meet again soon. Now, the same words came from Yi Guqin's mouth. Although in LV Qinghan's memory, that young man's voice was deeper, there was no doubt that it was Yi Guqin in front of her. Chen. Yi Guqin, ah, so that's how it is. LV Qinghan once again thought of Yi Guqin's alias and instantly understood. The sword sect's Yi Guqin in front of him was the same person as the genius blacksmith who had amazed everyone at the blacksmith convention. It was also because of this that LV Qinghan was so surprised. A person already had monstrous talent in blacksmithing. If he had monstrous talent in blacksmithing, the head of the Gongsun family, Gongsun Xianlong, had publicly judged that Yi Guqin might become a 4-star or even 5-star blacksmith in the future. Just this identity alone meant that Yi Guqin was destined to be extraordinary in the future. LV Qinghan could not imagine how far Yi Guqin would grow in the future. Qinghan now understands why junior sister Qin misses you day and night. LV Qinghan took a deep look at Yi Guqin. She had some doubts before about how outstanding Yi Guqin was to make Zither Fairy so sad. He was thinner than a yellow flower. Now, it seemed that LV Qinghan knew that she was wrong. Yi Guqin was not inferior to Zhou Tong at all. In fact, he was even stronger. Senior sister, what are you talking about? Zither Fairy's delicate face was slightly red as she bit her jade lips. Yi Guqin was slightly taken aback and glanced at Zither Fairy. Zither Fairy lowered her head slightly, and her heart was beating wildly. Yi Guqin's gaze was slightly complicated. He did not say much and looked at LV Qinghan. Get out of the way. You should know that you can't stop me. LV Qinghan bit her cherry lips. An outstanding woman like her would be pursued and adored wherever she went. Yet, Yi Guqin spoke to her in such a tone. However, LV Qinghan also knew that although she was not too afraid of Yi Guqin, if Yi Guqin used his full strength, she might not be able to block him. Sighing softly, LV Qinghan finally took a step back. Senior sister LV sister, what are you doing? We're from the same sect. Qinghan Yi Guqin saw that LV Qinghan had no intention of intervening. You LV Chen's eyes, Yi's is, Yu's yes she's words. She was Yi Luan's Yi was the sect's sect, she was Yi was there was her. Yi was she. LV Qinghan, you're the same as that Zither Fairy. You're both traitors. Ren Tingting screamed. Yi Guqin furrowed his brows and rushed forward. Yi was his was sect's was of course is. Is. Stop, you brat. Granny Shichuan coldly shouted from the Consonant's Divine Palace's viewing platform. Ren Tingting was her disciple. How could she stand by and watch Yi Guqin make a move on her? Granny Shichuan, what do you take this exchange for? Sect Master Qingyang asked. With Yi Guqin's actions and the divine dwelling experts of two factions threatening them, what was the point of holding the exchange? The other spectators also looked at Granny Shichuan with a trace of disdain in their eyes. These divine dwelling experts are really petty. They only allowed their disciples to attack others. Now that the sword sect has appeared, they're hopping mad again. In the Gongsun clan's viewing platform, Gongsun Xiaoye pursed her lips. Although she was also a disciple of the Consonant's Divine Palace, like LV Qinghan and Qinghan Yi Guqin, she was a disciple of the Palace Master's faction. Xiaoye, don't speak nonsense, Gongsun Xianlong said in a low voice. Although he didn't like the way these divine dwelling experts behaved, it wasn't something they could casually discuss. Granny Shichuan felt a little embarrassed when she sensed the gazes of disdain directed at her. However, she couldn't watch Ren Tingting be humiliated, so she said, Yi Guqin, you've already committed a grave mistake by killing my disciple, Pan Shuoyan. You can't repeat the same mistake today. Granny Shichuan's tone was icy cold. However, Yi Guqin found her words laughable. Pan Shuoyan had attacked him and Qinghan Yi Guqin, but he had made a grave mistake by killing Pan Shuoyan. Not only did Granny Shichuan's actions fail to make Yi Guqin feel the slightest bit of fear, it even had the opposite effect. Without the slightest hesitation, Yi Guqin swung his Xianming heavy sword. Void sword art, 10,000 void ripples. The ferocious sword wave seemed to cause the void to boil. The power of this move ignored all defenses. Ren Tingting's expression changed drastically when she saw this. She lashed out with the whip in her hand, creating a powerful whip of chi shadows. However, this was still unable to stop Yiguchen's attack. Although her cultivation was also at the 9 changes divine soul transformation, her combat power was far from comparable to Yiguchen's. Puchi. Without the slightest suspense, Ren Tingting was sent flying while vomiting blood. Her bones felt as if they had fallen apart, and the powerful shock force invaded her internal organs. The intense pain made Ren Tingting's face turn incomparably pale. Yiguchen's expression was cold, without the slightest trace of sympathy. Ren Tingting had been extremely ruthless when she attacked Qinghan Yiguchen earlier. She didn't have the slightest bit of camaraderie, as if they were sworn enemies. Since that was the case, Yiguchen wouldn't hold back either. Boom! He stomped his foot on Ren Tingting's chest. Ren Tingting's towering bosom looked like it was about to explode. Once again, Ren Tingting spat out a mouthful of blood, mixed with her shattered internal organs. Spare me, Yiguchen. I was wrong. Ren Tingting's mouth was full of blood as she admitted defeat. She recalled how she had looked down on Yiguchen and cursed endlessly. Qinghan Yiguchen had even angered Qinghan Yiguchen to the point of bleeding from the corner of her mouth. However, retribution came so quickly. Yiguchen's gaze was indifferent. He didn't hold back just because Ren Tingting was a woman. He kicked Ren Tingting away once again and ignored her. Ren Tingting's delicate body slammed into the pyramid and fainted. The corners of Grandma Shichuan's eyes twitched when she saw this scene. Her shriveled hands clenched slightly. She looked at Yiguchen with a murderous look in her eyes. However, Yiguchen ignored her. There were many people who wanted to kill him, but it was still unknown who would emerge victorious in the end. After dealing with the Consonance Palace, Yiguchen turned his gaze to the other prodigies. There was no need to mention the 9 Profound sect. Chen Yi, Bai Yanji, and the others were on good terms with Yiguchen, so they nodded to each other in greeting. At this moment, a hearty laugh sounded. I've always heard of the sword sect's Yiguchen. Today, I finally get to meet you. You are indeed extraordinary. You are indeed a dragon among men. The person who spoke was dressed in white and holding a folding fan. It was the little spirit emperor, Zhou Tong. Hearing this, Yiguchen looked at him with a deep gaze. Although Zhou Tong had a smile on his face and seemed very interested in befriending him, Yiguchen felt that Zhou Tong wasn't such a simple person. Moreover, Ji Yan had died at his hands. Would Zhou Tong, who was also one of the 3 little spirit emperors, have any good intentions towards him? Yiguchen didn't dare to agree. However, since Zhou Tong didn't provoke him, Yiguchen had no interest in fighting with him. He nodded slightly and directly ignored him. The smile on Zhou Tong's face slowly faded, but his eyes were cold. He was extremely unhappy with Yiguchen's attitude. However, Yiguchen didn't care about Zhou Tong at this moment. This was because the only person who could threaten him in the entire arena was standing at the top of the pyramid. That was, on the platform at the top. That was the first position. Yiguchen raised his head slightly and looked at the figure standing there. For a moment, the entire arena seemed to have quieted down. They knew that Yiguchen's upcoming battle wouldn't be so simple. Chapter 425. At the top of the pyramid, Xian Hao stood calmly. His long black and white hair fluttered in the wind, and his hands were behind his back. His eyes were deep and his face was calm. From the beginning, Xian Hao had already reached the platform at the top. He looked down at the many geniuses fighting below. It was not until Yiguchen appeared that Xian Hao's face changed. However, he did not besiege Yiguchen like the other geniuses. Because Xian Hao disdained to do so. In the Void Sword realm, he encountered an unprecedented setback when facing Yiguchen. All his opportunities were taken away by Yiguchen. In the end, he was embarrassed by the destructive thunder tide. It could be said that Xian Hao's cultivation had been smooth since then. Whether it was comprehending sword essence or leaving his name on the sword-seeking steel, it meant that Xian Hao had extraordinary talent. He had always been the top genius of the limitless sword sect. Even geniuses like Xian Feng and Xian Dai, who were a threat to him, could not shake his position. Xian Hao's only defeat so far came from Yi Guqian. Therefore, although he was relieved of Yi Guqian's death, he was also a little unwilling. He wanted to defeat Yi Guqian with his own hands. Now, the opportunity had come. Yi Guqian raised his head slightly and looked at the figure standing proudly at the top of the pyramid. Before Yi Guqian became famous, Xian Hao was already a famous genius in the Saint Origin dynasty. And now, he was still a genius. Even so, there was no trace of fear in Yi Guqian's eyes. As a swordsman, he had to have the determination to challenge the strongest. Feeling the dignified atmosphere, the tens of thousands of onlookers in the arena all held their breath. Yi Guqian. Xian Hao. Among these two, one was the top genius of the limitless sword sect. He was famous and had a peerless sword essence. He dominated the younger generation of the dynasty and had almost never been defeated. One of them was a top genius who had just risen up. The name of the sword master resounded throughout the entire dynasty. In the sword realm of the void, he had killed 100 people with a single sword strike. In the end, he had even killed hundreds of elite geniuses with a strange thunder. It could be said that these two people were outstanding existences in the younger generation of the dynasty. And today, they would collide. Yi Guqian, your arrogance should come to an end. Xian Tai stared coldly at Yi Guqian. Xian Tai was not the only one who thought so. Granny Shichuan, Han Tianho, and the others also thought the same. Yi Guqian could be said to be a dark horse that had appeared out of nowhere in this exchange, causing these factions to lose face. Ta Lin and the others from the sword sect were also a little nervous at this moment. Although they had confidence in Yi Guqian, Xian Hao was definitely not an ordinary top genius. His strength was unfathomable. Even in the void sword realm, Xian Hao had never used his full strength. Feeling the attention of the crowd, both Yi Guqian and Xian Hao focused on nothing else. Yi Guqian, you have far exceeded my expectations. Not only did you not die, but you have also recovered your genuine qi and your strength has greatly improved. Xian Hao stood at the top of the pyramid and said calmly. Are you disappointed? Yi Guqian dragged the Xianming heavy sword and walked step by step from the bottom of the pyramid to the top of the pyramid. Step by step, step by step. Disappointed? If it was before, I might have. But now, I'm not disappointed. Not only am I not disappointed, but I'm also very happy. Do you know why? The corners of Xian Hao's mouth revealed a faint smile. Because I can defeat you with my own hands. That's good. Otherwise, this exchange would be really boring. In the face of Xian Hao's provocation, Yi Guqian remained indifferent. His temperament was deeper than Xian Hao's. Yi Guqian, you are as arrogant as ever. However, you should know that today, not only will I not let you go, but the people from the other factions will also not let you go. Therefore, you only have one path, and that is, a dead end. As soon as Xian Hao finished speaking, the peerless void sword essence was released, causing the space to tremble. Waves of sharp sword qi seemed to shuttle through the void. The aura of the 9 changes of the divine soul realm and the aura of the void sword essence erupted at the same time, causing Xian Hao's long hair to flutter. Feeling Xian Hao's aura, everyone in the fighting arena was shocked. The top genius of the limitless sword sect lived up to his reputation. Seeing this, the corners of Xian Tai's mouth curled into a smile as he nodded in satisfaction. He believed that Xian Hao would not disappoint him. Yi Guqian walked step by step up the pyramid, facing Xian Hao's oppressive aura. He dragged the heavy sword on the ground and smiled. A dead end? For me, Yi Guqian, as long as I have a sword in my hand, there is no such thing as a dead end. I want to draw my sword and soar into the sky. I want to be free and unfettered. As soon as Yiguchen finished speaking, he stomped on the ground and rushed up with the help of the rebound force. The Xianming heavy sword in his hand swept across the void as if it was going to cut through the 9 heavens. Past. Now. Future. No one could threaten Yiguchen with a sword in his hand, because when he had a sword in his hand, no one could stop the tip of the sword. Boom. His move was like gunpowder, instantly igniting the atmosphere in the fighting arena. The inner yard disciples of the Sword Sect's Tower Forest were even more excited and roared. The Sword Sect is invincible. Bang! Xian Hao's cold eyes flashed and he also drew his sword. Today, he was going to crush Yiguchen's pride. Yiguchen's sword vibrated and the void shook violently. Ripples spread in all directions and the entire fighting arena rumbled. Void Sword Technique, Void 10,000 Waves. Xian Hao drew out the Dark Yin sword and also displayed the Void Sword Technique. Also, it was the ultimate move, Void Wave. The two ultimate moves collided and burst out endless void waves. Yiguchen's body shook violently and blood flowed out from the corner of his mouth. However, he still moved forward and did not take a step back. If he took a step back today, it would be a blasphemy to Yiguchen's sword principle. Xian Hao also did not take a step back, but blood also flowed out from the corner of his mouth. Physical strength was not Xian Hao's strong suit, but he had the void sword essence, so he was somewhat immune to this kind of space-shaking sword move. Although he was also injured, it was not very serious. Sword essence. Then let's compete again. At this moment, Yiguchen's sword essence had turned into a demon. A fierce blood-red sword essence surged out and rushed to the 9 heavens. The Shura sword will, which was filled with intense killing intent, swept out in all directions. Many of the surrounding sky prides were terrified and quickly retreated. Show me all the moves you have, lest you refuse to admit defeat when you lose. Xian Hao also displayed his void sword essence to the extreme. The two peerless sword essences collided and the void exploded. It was as if the entire world was filled with endless sword chi. Kill. There were not many words between the two, because at this moment, only by using their swords could they release all the fighting intent in their hearts. Boom! The two swords collided, and genuine chi surged out in all directions with the two of them as the origin. The battle at the top of the pyramid began. Who would be the champion of this exchange meet? Chapter 426. Everyone was watching the great battle before their eyes with rapt attention. After all, both of them were geniuses of the sword Dao and possessed exceptional sword essence. Furthermore, the two of them were from opposing forces. It could be said that they were natural enemies and were destined to be enemies. Boom! 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 Yiguchen unleashed his Azura sword essence and held the Xianming heavy sword. Although he had the Blood Prison sword and the Heavenly Demon General armor, Yiguchen did not plan to use them. However, the Xianming heavy sword was not inferior to the Blood Prison sword. First move of the Slaying God sword technique, Blood Massacre. Second move of the Slaying God sword technique, Demon Only. Third move of the Slaying God sword technique, Underworld. Fourth move of the Slaying God sword technique, Three Paths. Yiguchen had already mastered the God-slaying sword technique to the point of perfection. With the support of the Azura sword will, Yiguchen was like a god of death from the 9 nether underworlds. His sword aura was like a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood. More importantly, Yiguchen's understanding of the Slaying God's sword technique had deepened during the battle. Yiguchen had comprehended the 5th move, Yama, for a long time. Yiguchen also had some understanding of the 6th move of the Slaying God sword technique. Facing Yiguchen's ferocious attacks, Xian Hao unleashed his sword essence of the void as well as the top sword moves of the limitless sword sect. Rainbow sword technique, sword chi piercing the sun. Rain God sword technique, sorrowful rain. Xian Hao used both his mystical yin and mystical yang weapons at the same time. Just like Yiguchen, he used a sword technique with both hands. Clang! 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 When the swords collided, sword chi shot out in all directions. Yiguchen's Xianming heavy sword was unstoppable. At the same time, the Azura sword essence's slaughter and destruction sword essence made his sword moves seem like they could break through everything. On the other hand, Xian Hao's sword moves seemed to combine yin and yang. To a certain extent, they were similar to the moves of the black and white impermanence. But when Xian Hao was alone, he was clearly more skilled than the black and white deities. Yiguchen's Xianming heavy sword slashed vertically at Xian Hao. The sword's momentum was as heavy as Mount Tai, and the oppressive airflow caused the void to emit a sharp explosive sound as if it was shattering. Xian Hao held the profound Yang sword in one hand as he blocked the sword move of the profound Nether heavy sword. The terrifying strength that came from the sword caused Xian Hao's expression to change as the bones in his arm faintly crackled. At the same time, he wielded the dark yin sword in his other hand. The trajectory of the sword was extremely tricky as it stabbed towards Yiguchen from the side. Yiguchen's cold eyes flashed. His other hand grasped the void, and a vigorous golden real chi gushed out. Then, it condensed into a golden longsword in his hand. Although the Jin Chi condensed sword couldn't compete with the dark yin sword, it could block one move. Clang! The two swords collided and rubbed against each other, causing dazzling sparks to erupt. Yiguchen's Jin Chi longsword was shattered. At the same time, he stomped on Xian Hao's chest with one foot. Xian Hao displayed the attribute of the void sword intent. His figure flashed as he moved 3 meters to the side. Yiguchen's Xianming heavy sword turned and swept towards Xian Hao. Xian Hao's two swords blocked in front of him. With a bang, the two collided again. Looking at Yiguchen and Xian Hao, who were entangled in a somewhat inextricable battle, all the spectators present sighed in their hearts. That kind of proficient sword skill and control of the battle situation was indeed far from what ordinary geniuses could compare to. Even though Xian Feng and Xian Dai had always been unconvinced by Xian Hao, they had no choice but to admit that Xian Hao was indeed stronger than them. Although Zhou Tong's expression was calm, the seriousness in his eyes became more and more intense. Yiguchen, it seems that the legend about you is indeed not groundless. Unfortunately, whether it is because of Ji Yen or Zither Fairy, you are destined to be an enemy that I must eliminate. Zhou Tong waved his folding fan as his heart turned cold. As for Zither Fairy, Bai Yanji, and other good friends of Yiguchen, they were also nervously watching the battle. Of course, the ones who paid the most attention were the disciples of the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest, because this time, Yiguchen was fighting for them, for the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest. And Yiguchen was defeated by Xian Hao. Although they would not blame Yiguchen, it was obviously a great blow to the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest. Yiguchen also knew this, so no matter what, he had to win first place in this exchange for the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest. Boundless Heaven Sword Art, Inescapable Net. Yiguchen displayed the Boundless Heaven Sword Art. The sword edges streaked across the void and intertwined with each other to form an impenetrable sword net that enveloped Xian Hao. Rain God Sword Art, Rainstorm Absolute Sword. Xian Hao pointed his dark yin sword. The sword chi seemed to turn into countless raindrops that attacked the sword net. Continuous sounds of metal clashing resounded. The surrounding air seemed to be cut apart, leaving only chaotic sword light. God-slaying sword art, Yama. Yiguchen no longer held back and displayed the top-killing move of the God-slaying sword art. This was the most powerful move besides the sixth move. The blood-red shadow of Yama appeared behind Yiguchen and merged with his body. A terrifying blood-red sword light that was dozens of feet tall slashed vertically. The blood-red light reflected on the faces of everyone in the gladiator arena. This move was Yiguchen's signature move, and it was extremely powerful. In the face of Yiguchen's move, all the remaining talents in the gladiator arena felt a faint sense of suffocation. Even Xian Hao's face was slightly solemn, but he did not panic at all. As he stabbed out with his sword, the surging sword chi fluctuations were like a broken dam as they poured out with a loud rumble. Infinite Sword Art, Endless Sword. The terrifying sword chi seemed to be endless as it traversed the sky. The fierce and vigorous sword chi shocked everyone present. It's the signature move of the Infinite Sword sect, the Infinite Sword Art. Many people exclaimed. The Infinite Sword Art was the supreme sword technique of the Infinite Sword sect. There were many sword moves, and each move was stronger than the last. It could be said that among all the talents in the Infinite Sword sect, Xian Hao was the only one who had cultivated the Infinite Sword Art. Boom! An incomparable roar spread in all directions. The violent sword waves turned into waves of ripples and rushed out. Some of the talents in the gladiator arena even hurriedly retreated. What's the result? Everyone looked at the arena immediately. Whether it was Yi Guqin's god-slaying sword art or Xian Hao's infinite sword art, they were both astonishingly powerful, so they wanted to know the result. When the smoke and dust dissipated, Yi Guqin's figure was revealed. His body was covered with wounds of various sizes. Those were the injuries caused by the endless sword. The sword chi seemed to be endless, and there was no way to avoid it. Blood flowed from the corner of his mouth, but he still did not take a step back. On the other hand, Xian Hao was not at ease either. There was blood at the corner of his mouth, and his clothes were somewhat tattered. Especially the part between his thumb and index finger where he held the sword, it was broken and bleeding non-stop. Xian Hao, show me your true strength. You have been hiding your true strength in the Void Sword realm. Yi Guqin's eyes were cold. Although he did not use his full strength, Xian Hao was equally unfathomable. Oh, Yi Guqin, don't worry. I won't hold back against you. Xian Hao said and attacked again. In an instant, Yi Guqin felt as if everything around him had gone silent. Only Xian Hao's sword was left. Infinite Sword Art, Silent Sword. Chapter 427. The Ultimate Sword Technique was the supreme king-level sword technique of the Ultimate Sword sect. It was rumored that only the sect master of the Ultimate Sword sect, Xian Wuji, could perform the entire Ultimate Sword technique. Among the younger generation of the Ultimate Sword sect, Xian Hao was the most proficient in the Ultimate Sword technique. When his sword came out, the surrounding sounds seemed to be sucked away. This sword could actually affect Yi Guqin's soul and hearing. In an instant, Yi Guqin felt that before the sword arrived, a strong soul-shaking power surged into his sea of consciousness. If it were an ordinary person or a person with a weak soul, the sword would be stunned. This sword strike was enough to stun a person for an instant, and then take their life without a sound. But Yi Guqin was different. Not only was his sea of consciousness far stronger than ordinary people, but he also had the meteorite demonic soul butterfly, a spiritual object guarding his sea of consciousness. He was not afraid of soul-attacking methods at all. But in Yi Guqin's sea of consciousness, the meteorite demonic soul butterfly flapped its wings, and an astral soul wave spread out. It directly blocked the silent soul-shaking power of the sword. It even attacked Xian Hao's sea of consciousness. At the same time, Yi Guqin also drew his sword. In his body, the purple lightning nether thunder spread along his meridians and attached to the Xianming heavy sword. The ultimate move of the horizontal lightning sword, thunder brilliance of the 9 heavens. The violent purple lightning accompanied by the surging sword chi poured out and collided with Xian Hao's sword silently. The surging sword chi waves swept in all directions. Xian Hao suddenly felt that his sea of consciousness was violently shaken. However, to Yi Guqin's surprise, Xian Hao was not injured by the star soul wave as he had imagined. His soul consciousness became clear in an instant. This Xian Hao actually has a spiritual object guarding him. Yi Guqin was slightly surprised. Since Xian Hao could resist the meteorite demonic soul butterfly's astral soul wave, it meant that he also had a spiritual object guarding him in his sea of consciousness. Even if it might not be as good as the meteorite demonic soul butterfly, it was enough to resist such an attack. Indeed, within Xian Hao's sea of consciousness, there was a small golden bell protecting his sea of consciousness from the attacks of the astral soul waves. Yi Guqin, you've got more and more tricks up your sleeve. If it wasn't for the golden spirit soul-protecting bell in my sea of consciousness, I might have fallen for your tricks. Xian Hao's eyes were cold. He thought that his silent sword would at least be able to severely injure Ye Guqin. However, he never expected that Ye Guqin's sea of consciousness would also have a spiritual item that could protect it. Their swords collided once more. At the same time, their souls began to compete. Ye Guqin's eyes were swallowed by the crimson light as he activated the Eye of Azura. With the support of Ye Guqin's powerful soul, the power of the Eye of Azura grew even stronger. Xian Hao felt that countless cruel Azura illusions kept appearing in his mind like reincarnation. Ye Guqin seized the opportunity and flashed forward, his sword momentum pressing forward with an indomitable will, opening and closing wide, like Mount Tai pressing down on Xian Hao. In an instant, Xian Hao was under tremendous pressure. But at the same time, just as Xian Hao was affected by the Eye of Azura, the golden spirit soul-protecting bell in his sea of consciousness actually started shaking and trembling. Dong! 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 A series of bell chimes spread out like ripples. Xian Hao's sea of consciousness instantly became clear. Ye Guqin, don't think that only you have divine soul attack means. Xian Hao urged the divine soul power in his sea of consciousness, spreading out along with the bell chimes of the golden spirit soul-protecting bell. Golden Bell 100 Soul Wave. This was a move belonging to the golden spirit soul-protecting bell. It was the same as the meteorite devil soul butterfly's astral soul wave. Bang! 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 Ye Guqin's sea of consciousness released the astral soul wave at the same time. In an instant, the entire fighting arena seemed to have fallen into a divine soul storm. These two people have such powerful divine soul power. Furthermore, they both seem to have spiritual items that are protecting their sea of consciousness. When many martial artists saw the situation, their faces all carried a look of surprise and envy. The rarity of spiritual items that were protecting one's sea of consciousness was not lower than exotic fire and exotic thunder. They were similarly items that could only be encountered but not sought. However, Ye Guqin and Xian Hao both possessed them. Not only that, exotic fire, exotic thunder, peerless sword intent, and other rare existences, they did not seem to lack them. This involuntarily made people sigh. How big was the gap between people? In the arena, Ye Guqin and Xian Hao's battle reached the climax. The two people's true qi and divine souls were practically fully unleashed. Their true qi set off a storm, and their divine souls swept up ripples. Limitless sword art, shadowless sword. Xian Hao once again displayed the limitless sword art. His figure instantly turned into an afterimage, the tip of his sword pointing straight at Ye Guqin's face. Shadow kill sword art, vanishing shadow in an instant. Ye Guqin's sword momentum condensed, then instantly exploded, his figure pulling out numerous afterimages. The speed of the two people's swords dazzled the people present. Ordinary divine soul realm martial artists could not even see the speed of their swords clearly. Clang! 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 Dazzling sparks erupted from the collision of the swords. Ye Guqin raised his other hand, and the six-pulse divine sword aura burst out, piercing towards Xian Hao's face. Xian Hao's figure rapidly dodged, and the mystical yin and mystical yang swords in his hand stabbed out at the same time. Ye Guqin's Xianming heavy sword blocked horizontally, like a pitch-black shield, blocking Xian Hao's sword momentum. Clang! Two sparks erupted, and Ye Guqin felt that a swift and fierce sword aura seemed to want to bombard him through the Xianming heavy sword. On the surface of Ye Guqin's body, an azure gold light flowed, and the impeccable Vajra body was activated to the extreme, blocking the sword aura's attack. Xian Hao's expression turned serious. He felt that Ye Guqin's aura was like a mountain, unmoving and unwavering. Ye Guqin, can you really not take a step back today? Xian Hao roared, and his true qi erupted like a volcano, erupting to the extreme. Limitless sword art, unstoppable sword. Xian Hao's sword momentum was unstoppable, as if it was breaking through thousands of miles of waves. Unstoppable sword was truly unstoppable. Nothing could stop Xianhao's sword. You've even used this move. Yi Guqin, how can you not lose? Xian Tai sneered. Feeling the strong pressure of Xianhao's sword art, all the elites present held their breaths. They knew that if they were in Xianhao's place, it would definitely be difficult for them to withstand Xianhao's extreme sword. Because in the face of this sword, defense was useless. If they defended, they would immediately fall into a passive state and be oppressed by Xianhao's sword momentum. Therefore, they could only face this sword head-on. Is the sword sect going to use that move? Many people's eyes were filled with anticipation. They hadn't forgotten the sword attack that Yi Guqin had used against Gu Xiaoyang of the Starry Universe Sword Pavilion on the Infinite Wasteland Plain, which had transformed into a pair of sword wings and carried a murderous aura. Although they did not know what kind of sword technique it was, everyone knew that it should be Yi Guqin's strongest move. However, Yi Guqin did not use the 10,000 God Tribulation. Because for him, this kind of extreme confrontation and oppression was the best time to comprehend and break through. The trajectory of the boundless heaven sword art appeared in his mind. As Xianhao's sword momentum pressed down, the cold sword chi seemed to be about to touch Yi Guqin's face. What exactly is Yi Guqin doing? Seeing that Yi Guqin did not seem to be doing anything, everyone present was in an uproar. Yan Wushuang, Zither Fairy, and the people of the Sword Sect's Talon Forest were all nervous. Only Feng Manlu had a satisfied smile on his face. Yi Guqin, how many more surprises can you bring by using your opponent's extreme sword move to oppress yourself and make a breakthrough in your swordsmanship? Feng Manlu thought to himself. At the same time, under everyone's gaze, Yi Guqin finally made a move. A light flashed in his mind. In an instant, he used the boundless heaven sword art. It was not a small unique skill or a big killing move, but an ultimate move. Boundless heaven sword art, turn it into 1,000. When Yi Guqin struck with his sword, the sword chi of heaven and earth surged. Chapter 428. The boundless heaven sword art was the swordsmanship that Yi Guqin's father had passed down to him. It was also the swordsmanship that Yi Guqin had practiced for the longest time. However, because it was a supreme spiritual level swordsmanship, it was not easy to comprehend it and display the ultimate move. However, Yi Guqin had comprehended it for such a long time, and under the pressure of Xianhao's sword momentum, Yi Guqin finally grasped the flash of inspiration in his mind and instantly comprehended the essence of the boundless heaven sword art. The ultimate move of the boundless heaven sword art was called Infinity Transformation. Just like the name, Yi Guqin's sword seemed to have integrated into the boundless heaven world. Countless sword trajectories overlapped with each other. At this moment, Yi Guqin's entire being seemed to have merged with the world along with his sword. However, the boiling sword chi between heaven and earth was enough to show the power of infinity transformation. Boom! Unparalleled sword chi swept across all directions, hissing and splitting the earth. Even the other geniuses in the arena temporarily retreated to the four corners. They did not dare to get too close to the pyramid for fear of being affected. If they were swept by the terrifying sword chi, even an expert in the sixth transformation of the divine soul realm would be seriously injured and vomit blood. Cough! The sword chi dust swept across all directions, and all the spectators around stared at the arena intently. However, what shocked them the most was that Xianhao had actually been forced back. He coughed up blood, and his clothes were torn in many places, revealing bloody wounds. Infinity Transformation was a move where countless sword chi surrounded Xianhao from all directions. If he did not have the ultimate defensive means, he would not be able to avoid being injured. Xianhao gathered the genuine chi in his body, forcibly suppressing the injury caused by the sword chi. At the same time, he looked coldly at Yi Guqin. Are you using me to sharpen your sword? Everyone could not help but look at Yi Guqin. Yi Guqin was also injured. There was a sword wound on his shoulder that was so deep that the bone could be seen. That was the injury caused by Xianhao's sword. This move could be said to be an exchange of injuries, but anyone with discerning eyes could see that Xianhao was at a disadvantage. The disciples of the Wuji sword sect looked a little resentful. Xian Tai's face was as gloomy as water. Being able to use you to sharpen my sword is my recognition of you, because ordinary people are not even qualified to be sharpened by me, Guqin said truthfully. This was indeed his heartfelt words. Ordinary opponents were not qualified to be sharpened by Yi Guqin. You. Even with Xian Hao's temperament, he was still choked. The tens of thousands of spectators in the arena were speechless. After all, not everyone had the guts to say such words to a top genius like Xian Hao. He Guyu was the second one, apart from that guy, he is my second one. Xian Tai's was one art on, S was heaven art of the U. In her eyes Xian. Of one in her eyes, of in her, Yi was in her eyes was. Yi Guqin, you. Very good. Xian Hao was atop heavenses after all, so he quickly adjusted his state of mind. It would be a fatal blow to Xian Hao's reputation if he were to lose to Yi Guqin under the watchful eyes of the crowd. Xian Hao suddenly took a step forward. With one step, ripples appeared in the void, and his aura rose by another level. Senior brother Xian Hao actually used the 9 steps of heaven. Many disciples of the Wuji sword sect were shocked. The 9 steps of heaven was not only a movement technique, but it also had the effect of shaking the true qi in the body. With every step, his aura rose by a level, and his true qi became stronger. Rumor had it that if one took 9 steps, they would be unstoppable. With Xian Hao's status, he did not need to use the 9 steps of heaven. But now, facing Yi Guqin, Xian Hao truly used his technique. Yi Guqin immediately understood Xian Hao's technique. He could not let Xian Hao take 9 steps. Yi Guqin's heavy sword slashed out, and the violent power of lightning poured out like a tide, covering Xian Hao. Wuji sword art, formless sword. The sword momentum intersected, and the air billowed. Xian Hao took a second step. Boom! His sword struck out again. Wuji sword art, impermanence sword. This sword was like a dream, like an illusion, like impermanence, and it was simply difficult to figure out the sword path. Yi Guqin used the Eye of Azura again, not to use divine soul methods, but to use the Eye of Azura to capture the movement of Xian Hao's sword path. Clang! This sword was blocked by Yi Guqin. But Xian Hao took a third step, and his true qi skyrocketed again, his aura even stronger. Wuji sword art, impermanence sword. Whoosh, another swift and fierce sword slashed over, the sword edge cutting through the void, and a sharp whistling sound shook in all directions. Everyone understood now. Xian Hao wanted to stop Yi Guqin while taking 9 steps to completely suppress Yi Guqin. With a boom, Xian Hao took a 4th step again. His aura was wild and boundless, and the power of his Wuji sword art also increased by a level. But what was strange was that under Xian Hao's fierce attack, Yi Guqin actually still did not retreat a step. Although his body shook, and the corners of his mouth coughed up blood, Yi Guqin still pressed forward, and did not retreat a step. Heaven-splitting sword soul, come out. Yi Guqin also did not hold back anymore, directly unleashing the 30,000 heaven-splitting sword souls in his body. The power of the heaven-splitting sword souls was greatly related to their numbers. Yi Guqin only had 10,000 sword souls before, and he already displayed such power. Now, with 30,000 sword souls, the power multiplied, and could not be mentioned in the same breath as before. Boom! 30,000 green sword souls surged out like a green wave. The fluctuations they emitted shook one's mind. At the same time, Xian Hao took a 5th step. His aura was even more ferocious, his long hair dancing wildly, true qi surging, and both swords were displayed at the same time. Wuji sword art, impermanence sword. Wuji sword art, shadowless sword. The 2 Wuji sword arts stabbed out at the same time, the sword qi roaring wildly, tearing apart the heaven-splitting sword souls in front of him. Xian Hao was like a reef in a huge wave, breaking through the tide of heaven-splitting sword souls, and charged towards Yi Guqin. do you think the power of the heaven-splitting sword souls is only like this? Yi Guqin's eyes were cold. He controlled the sword souls to besiege Xianhao from all directions. At this moment, Xianhao seemed to be wrapped in a green sphere, and the 30,000 sword souls were densely packed within it. The entire martial arts arena was completely silent. Did Xianhao fail? Xian Tai fist frowned. Xianhao was the top genius of the Wuji sword sect. If he lost, it would be a great loss of face. Everyone else present was also watching the battle closely. Did senior brother Yi win? Some disciples of the sword sect Pagoda Forest were excited. It's not that simple. Elder Qing he frowned slightly. With his cultivation, he could naturally sense the fluctuation. The entire arena was cold and solemn. At this moment, there was a sudden thump. The sphere formed by the heaven-splitting sword souls shook violently. Thump. There was another thump, and the heaven-splitting sword souls seemed to have been shaken off a little. It's the heaven-trampling 9 steps. Some disciples of the Wuji sword sect exclaimed. Thump. Following a violent thump, the 30,000 heaven-splitting sword souls suddenly burst into chaos. Among the sword souls in the sky, Xianhao's long hair danced in the wind. He took 9 steps directly, and his genuine qi surged. At the same time, the void sword essence erupted again. However, unlike before, an extremely illusory sword realm suddenly appeared with the eruption of his sword essence. Void Sky Ultimate Domain, come out! Xianhao shouted coldly. His aura soared to the extreme, and he directly brought out the illusory sword realm. This was the sword realm that belonged to the Void Sword Principle, the Void Sky Ultimate Domain. Chapter 429. Sword Intent, after transforming into Sword Dao, could display a Sword Dao domain. The Sword Tao field domain was like a formation or a boundary that could greatly enhance the strength of the person who used it. For example, Xia Yubing's Ice Sword Dao could display the Ice domain. There was also Yi Guqin's Azura Sword Dao's 18 layers of Azura Blood Sea. And this Void Sky Ultimate Domain was a Sword Dao domain exclusive to Void Sword Dao. Xianhao's comprehension of Void Sword Intent hadn't reached the level of Sword Dao. Therefore, the Void Sky Ultimate Domain he displayed was also extremely illusory and unreal. Even so, the might of this move was still incomparably powerful. It's actually a Sword Dao domain. Seeing Xianhao display the Void Sky Ultimate Domain, the entire arena went into an uproar. Heaven's Pride who could comprehend sword intent was already 1 in 10,000, and those who could form a Sword Dao domain were even rarer. Yi Guqin, do you think you can defeat me so easily? The battle has only just begun. You should be proud that you made me use the Void Sky Ultimate Domain. Xianhao said coldly. His sky-trampling 9 steps had already been fully displayed. Adding the support of the Void Sky Ultimate Domain, Xianhao's aura was unparalleled. That kind of terrifying fluctuation made some life and death chamber experts speechless. If Xianhao broke through life and death chamber, I'm afraid ordinary life and death chamber experts wouldn't be his opponent. A life and death chamber expert sighed. Sword Dao Domain. Yi Guqin's eyes flickered faintly. Xianhao being able to comprehend the Void Sword Dao domain was indeed out of his expectations. However, Yi Guqin didn't show the slightest bit of cowardice. On the contrary, his battle intent increased. Only such an opponent was worthy of being defeated. Yi Guqin didn't hold back either, and the Azura sword intent gushed out from his body. He had been comprehending the Azura sword intent for a long time, and his understanding of sword intent was becoming deeper and deeper. As he displayed the Azura sword intent, the entire heaven and earth seemed to be dyed in a layer of tragic blood red. Everyone could only see boundless blood red spreading out from Yi Guqin's body. A ferocious blood red sword essence gushed out like a tidal wave. Amidst the blood-colored waves, a blood-colored 18-layer prison surged out. Azura Sword Dao Domain, Azura Blood Sea 18 levels. Boom! The two peerless Sword Dao domains collided, and the resulting shockwaves were shocking. The emotions of everyone in the arena had reached the peak of excitement. In the Saint Origin dynasty, such a battle between the geniuses of the younger generation was extremely rare. The disciples of the Sword Sect, Talon, and the Limitless Sword Sect stared intently at the battle before them. It could be said that the battle between Yiguchen and Xianhao represented the strongest strength of the younger generation of the Sword Sect and the Limitless Sword Sect. The outcome of their battle would also show the strength of the younger generation of the two sections. In the arena, Xianhao took a step forward, and his figure practically flashed in front of Yiguchen in an instant. What a fast speed! Yiguchen's heavy sword swept out. He was secretly surprised. The Void Sword essence could originally bring Xianhao great speed, but now it seemed that Xianhao's speed was even faster. In this virtual sky ultimate domain, my speed will be even faster. Yiguchen, can you withstand it? Xianhao's two swords were not only fast, but also fast. The cold sword edge cut through the void, leaving behind afterimages as it stabbed towards Yiguchen. Yiguchen performed the protection of Luo Tian, and the Guardian Vajra shadow protected his body. At the same time, he performed the God-slaying sword technique again. With the support of the Azura Blood Sea, the power of the God-slaying sword technique multiplied. The fierce blood-red sword light seemed to be able to tear the world apart as it collided with Xianhao's sword. Waves of sword waves poured out in all directions, and at the same time, the two sword Dao domains collided with each other. The Azura Blood Sea overturned the world. The virtual sky ultimate domain covered the void. The collision of the two sword Dao domains was even more intense than the battle between Yiguchen and Xianhao. Although the domains were extremely illusory, their power was beginning to show. These two are both geniuses of the sword. Although they have not comprehended the Sword Dao, they are able to display the power of the Sword Dao domain to such an extent. It's really rare. An old Sword Dao Grandmaster sighed. However, Xian Tai was not satisfied with this stalemate. What he wanted was for Xianhao to completely crush Yiguchen, not for such a situation. The Flame Emperor, Grandma Shichuan, Marquis Huntian, and the others looked at each other and understood. Yiguchen's strength and talent had exceeded their expectations. If they allowed Yiguchen to continue growing, he would definitely become another Feng Manlu, or even stronger. Therefore, a trace of killing intent appeared in their eyes. No matter whether Yiguchen won or lost today, they would not let him go easily. Bang! Yiguchen and Xianhao's swords clashed again. Yiguchen did not retreat, but his bones cracked. Xianhao, who was in the virtual sky ultimate domain, gave him a lot of pressure. Xianhao's strange speed was impossible to guard against. However, Yiguchen's sword aura was also filled with killing intent. The blood-red sword light constantly swept towards Xianhao, causing him to suffer more injuries. Clearly, the battle had reached its climax. The two of them only had one goal in mind, and that was to defeat their opponent and take first place. Yiguchen, what's the point of stalling? Let's decide this in one move. Xianhao said as he gathered his true qi to the peak. Xianhao had consumed a lot of his true qi and spiritual soul. On the other hand, Yiguchen's true qi and spiritual soul were still abundant. The limit of his qi was not something an ordinary person could compare with. However, since Xianhao wanted to decide this in one move, Yiguchen did not mind accompanying him. Limitless Sword Art, Invincible Sword. Xianhao's true qi gathered, and the strong sword qi seemed to split the sky and earth. It's actually invincible sword. Many disciples of the Limitless Sword sect cried out. Even Xian Tai's eyes flashed. Although there were many moves in the Limitless Sword art, there were only 3 moves that were really difficult to cultivate. And this invincible sword was one of the 3 moves. On the other side, the eyes of the Sword Sect's Talon and the others also revealed nervousness. They could also feel the power of Xianhao's invincible sword. Yiguchen. Yen Wushuang clenched her jade-like hands. In her heart, her dissatisfaction with Yiguchen had turned into worry at this moment. If Yiguchen lost, it would undoubtedly be a fatal blow to the sword sect's talon. Feeling Xian Hao's sword attack, Ye Guchen took a deep breath. Ye Guchen's heart calmed down at the moment when the outcome of the battle was about to be determined. He slowly raised the Xianming heavy sword in his hand, and a formless power condensed. With a boom, a pair of sword wings spread out behind Ye Guchen's back. Those were wings that were completely condensed from ferocious sword qi. Myriad God tribulation, heaven, and earth extermination. Ye Guchen's sword struck out, the sword momentum seemed to want to destroy heaven and earth. The air screamed, and the earth trembled. Xian Hao's sword was similarly powerful. His true qi and spiritual soul were all condensed to the extreme. It was as if this sword was really invincible. Two extreme moves collided with a loud bang. Unparalleled destructive sword qi swept out in all directions. This sword collision shook heaven and earth. Chapter 430. The entire martial arena was rumbling and trembling. The pyramid-shaped building shook violently from the collision, cracks spreading all over its surface. Is this really caused by two divine soul realm cultivators? Many of the spectators were dumbfounded. Even a battle between life and death chamber experts wouldn't be this intense. However, what everyone was most concerned about was the result. Whether it was Limitless Sword Sect or Sword Sect Pagoda Forest, from Xian Tai Yi Wind Manlu to ordinary disciples, everyone was looking at the arena. Smoke and dust filled the air as sword qi wantonly filled the air. After the extreme collision, there was a deathly silence. There were more than 10,000 people in the arena. At this moment, all of them seemed to be holding their breaths. The atmosphere was terrifyingly silent. This battle wasn't just a battle between Ye Guchen and Xian Hao. It was also a battle between Sword Sect Pagoda Forest and Limitless Sword Sect. Ye Guchen, if you lose this battle, you won't be qualified to be Gu Zun's opponent. Yu Bufan was also paying attention to the battle. He was certain that the successor chosen by Wind Manlu was most likely Ye Guchen. If Ye Guchen couldn't even defeat Xian Hao, then there was no suspense in the battle between him and Gu Zun. Gu Zun was only stronger than Xian Hao. At this moment, everyone was watching at the top of the pyramid. As the smoke and dust dispersed, Ye Guchen and Xian Hao's figures appeared in front of everyone. At a glance, everyone couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. The reason for that was because both of their injuries were extremely frightening. On one side of Ye Guchen's chest, there was a huge wound. His flesh was torn and blood was dripping down. It was a terrifying sight. It was a terrifying wound caused by an invincible sword. If Ye Guchen's body wasn't abnormally strong, his body would have been split in half. As for Xian Hao's injury, it was a piercing wound. Because the Thousand Gods Tribulation World Annihilation gathered sword qi at a single point, this wound directly penetrated Xian Hao's abdomen. If Xian Hao hadn't dodged in time, his heart would have been pierced. Although the two's injuries were very serious, those with discerning eyes could see it. Ye Guchen's position was the same as before, not retreating a single step. As for Xian Hao, he retreated several dozen meters. This proved that Xian Hao was at a disadvantage in this move. Puchi, Xian Hao's body trembled. His two swords stabbed into the ground as he spat out a large mouthful of blood. His face was pale as he stared at Ye Guchen. Xian Hao had never been in such a sorry state before. Even in the Void Sword realm before, whether it was Xian Hao or others, they only thought that it was because of the unusual thunder that Ye Guchen was able to cause such a terrible massacre. But now, Ye Guchen had indeed relied on his own strength to heavily injure Xian Hao to such an extent. No one doubted the sword sect's strength anymore. Do you still want to fight? Ye Guchen forcefully endured his injuries as he raised the Netharism heavy sword and spoke indifferently. I, Xian Hao, haven't lost yet. Xian Hao didn't believe it, nor did he think he would lose. His limitless sword technique had yet to be fully cultivated. He still had the possibility of improving it, so how could he be willing to lose to Ye Guchen here? Again. A strong fighting spirit burst forth from Xian Hao's eyes. If he admitted defeat in front of everyone and lost to Yi Guqin, it would be a stain that he would never be able to erase for the rest of his life. Swoosh! Xian Hao struck out with his sword again, but everyone could see that he was barely able to continue with his injuries. Yi Guqin frowned slightly, but since Xian Hao hadn't admitted defeat, he naturally wouldn't hold back either. The Netherism heavy sword struck out again, aiming straight for Xian Hao. But at this moment, a figure suddenly flashed into the arena, and his right palm struck directly at Yi Guqin. This scene was so sudden that even Feng Manlu couldn't react for a moment. That was because even he did not expect that person to be so shameless. The person who flashed into the arena was Xian Tai. His palm strike seemed casual, but he didn't hold back in the slightest. How terrifying was the palm strike of a divine dwelling expert! Even an ordinary life and death chamber expert would be seriously injured. Not to mention that Yi Guqin was still seriously injured. In a moment of desperation, Yi Guqin could only use the protection of all heaven and the Xianming heavy sword as a shield in front of him. Boom! Yi Guqin, who hadn't retreated a single step, was finally sent flying. He spat out a large mouthful of blood, and even the Xianming heavy sword was sent flying. The protection of all heaven was directly destroyed by the palm strike. Everyone present was dumbfounded, and their faces were filled with astonishment. Xian Tai's palm strike had caught them off guard. A divine dwelling expert had directly interfered in the Heaven Pride's exchange and even sent Yi Guqin, who had the upper hand, flying with one palm. This was beyond everyone's expectations. Yi Guqin. Lord Yi. Senior Brother Yi. Yan Wushuang, Zither Fairy, and the disciples of the Sword Sect Forest Pagoda cried out in surprise. Feng Manlu instantly flashed and caught Yi Guqin. Feng Manlu, who had always been calm and collected, had a grave expression on his face at this moment. Feeling the uproar around him, Xian Tai's face also stiffened. But he had no choice because anyone with discerning eyes could see that Xian Hao's condition was worse than Yi Guqin's. If this continued, Xian Hao would be the one to lose. But Xian Hao was the chief heaven pride of the Limitless Sword Sect and also the representative of the Sun Moon Hall. So, he couldn't lose. Therefore, Xian Tai had to intervene even if he had to. However, he wouldn't openly accept everyone's disdain. Xian Tai coldly snorted and said, Yi Guqin harbored evil intentions towards Xian Hao and instigated Xian Hao to fight to the death. This is an exchange, and no one's life is allowed. But Yi Guqin turned a deaf ear to it, so I stopped him. His words made the whole place fall silent. How could he be so shameless? Many people's faces were filled with astonishment, and anyone could see that. It wasn't Yi Guqin who instigated Xian Hao. He was just asking, but Xian Hao stubbornly refused to admit defeat and wanted to fight to the death. Now, according to Xian Tai's words, Yi Guqin harbored evil intentions and wanted to kill Xian Hao. Isn't that too shameless? Gongsun Xiaoye said angrily. Although she wasn't familiar with Yi Guqin, she still had some righteousness in her. She wasn't the only one. Most people thought the same, but because of Xian Tai's status, no one dared to say it out loud. Xian Tai's eyes were cold. He didn't need to explain much. He just needed an excuse. But then, something even more shocking happened. Granny Shichuan of Lingxi Divine Palace stood out and said indifferently, Palace Master Xian's words are reasonable. I also think that Yi Guqin is perverse and murderous. If we didn't stop him, it would be hard to guarantee that he wouldn't kill him. I also agree. Fortunately, Palace Master Xian is benevolent and intervened. Otherwise, someone would have died in today's exchange. Yan Emperor of 3 imperial palaces also stood out. I think that Xian Hao should take first place in this exchange. Yi Guqin's personality is too extreme. He doesn't deserve to take first place, Marquis Huntian of Xingyuan Academy said. Since Princess Yuan Shi and the others couldn't take first place, they might as well do the Limitless Sword Sect a favor. As the Divine Palace experts of these factions spoke out, the whole arena was in an uproar. Shameless. The eyes of the people of the sword sect's tower forest turned red, and they gritted their teeth. Was this the behavior of a lofty divine palace expert? Chapter 431. It was no wonder that the Sword Sect Tower Association was so furious. It was because Xian Tai, Grandma Shichuan, and the others had gone too far. Xian Tai had shamelessly attacked and severely injured Yiguchen, who had a chance of winning. In their eyes, Yiguchen was murderous, while Xian Tai was benevolent. Even if they were twisting the truth, they wouldn't go so far. Shameless. Not only the disciples of the Sword Sect Tower Association, but even Qin He and the other elders couldn't suppress the anger in their hearts. Their clenched fists trembled. However, what made the hearts of the disciples of the Sword Sect Tower Association turn cold was that other than the 9 profound sect, the other 7 great forces were on the same side as the limitless Sword Sect. Even Yu Bufan of the Sealed Blade Royal Hall had a complicated look in his eyes. He didn't stand on the same side as Xian Tai and the others, but he also didn't stand on the Sword Sect Tower Association's side. In fact, it was already good enough that Yu Bufan could guarantee that he wouldn't go against the Sword Sect Tower Association. After all, the Sealed Blade Royal Hall had also suffered heavy losses in the Void Sword realm. Yu Bufan purely wanted to know if Yiguchen had the ability to fight against Gu Zun. But now, Yu Bufan sighed. Whether Yiguchen could overcome the current crisis was another matter. In addition to the 7 great forces, there were also super clans like Gongsun and Shinto. But they tactfully didn't express their opinions. These super clans wouldn't interfere in the grudges between the 7 great forces. Even Shinto Miao of the Shinto clan sneered. So what if Yiguchen was talented? Before reaching the divine dwelling stage, he could only be bullied and humiliated. He couldn't resist at all. Xian Tai seemed to have sensed the strange calmness in the entire arena. There was a hint of coldness at the corner of his mouth as he said, "Yiguchen, don't be resentful. I am teaching you to restrain your killing intent." Some of the spectators couldn't bear to hear Xian Tai's words. How could a young genius of the Sword Sect have to endure such humiliation? That Yiguchen must be exploding with anger. It wasn't easy for him to get first place, but he's about to hand it over to someone else and he doesn't even have the ability to resist. On the Saint Origin Academy's side, Princess Yuan Shi, who had once been trampled under Yiguchen's feet, gloated. "Sigh, I've long said that having talent and strength is nothing more than the bravery of an ignorant man. Yiguchen, when will you understand this principle?" Zhou Tong was dressed in white, fanning himself with a fan as he shook his head. There was a sense of superiority in his words, as if Yiguchen was just a brute. In addition, Xian Feng, Xian Dai, Ren Tingting, and the other geniuses who had been severely injured by Yiguchen were all sneering. They couldn't wait to see Yiguchen's grief and indignation. However, out of everyone's expectations, Yiguchen did not feel any anger, resentment, or lament the injustice. He just took out a sage-to-be elixir with healing effects from his origin ring and swallowed it. After all, Xian Tai didn't hold back at all. Even though he had the perfect physical body, the flawless diamond body, the protection of Luo Tian, and the defense of the Xianming heavy sword, he was still severely injured. It could be said that if it were any other heaven pride, they would have either died or been crippled by Xian Tai's attack. Xian Tai's vicious heart was evident. However, outsiders only knew that Xian Tai had casually attacked, but they didn't know how terrifying his attack was. "Yiguchen, let me do it," Feng Manlu said calmly. However, Yiguchen could hear a trace of extreme coldness in his voice. Feng Manlu, who had always been gentle and rarely got angry, was really angry this time. "Senior Feng, wait, I still have something to do." To Feng Manlu's surprise, Yiguchen stopped him for the time being. He slowly walked to the side of the Xianming heavy sword, picked it up, and then slowly walked to the top of the pyramid. With each step, he left a bloody footprint. That is. When the crowd saw the bloody footprints left behind by Yiguchen, they were all shocked to the core. It seems that Xian Tai didn't just casually attack. Although Yi Guqin was also severely injured when he fought with Xian Hao, it shouldn't be this heavy. Some of the more observant people also saw the clues. It wasn't a casual attack, it was a move to take Yi Guqin's life. Xian Tai's eyes flickered slightly. He didn't understand what Yi Guqin wanted to do now. Yi Guqin walked up slowly, one step at a time. The bloody footprints behind him made everyone sigh in their hearts. Obviously, no matter what the result was, the name of sword sect Yi Guqin would once again resound throughout the Saint Origin dynasty. Under everyone's gaze, Yi Guqin was only one step away from the platform at the top of the pyramid. He turned his gaze to Xian Hao. His tone was still calm as he asked, "Xian Hao, do you still want to fight?" Xian Hao was stunned when he saw this. At this point, Yi Guqin still had the strength to fight. However, Xian Hao wasn't someone who would admit defeat. It wasn't his intention for Xian Tai to attack. However, since Yi Guqin had spoken, Xian Hao naturally wouldn't hold back. Just as he took a few steps forward, Xian Tai suddenly stood in front of him and said, "Xian Hao, don't be fooled. Yi Guqin obviously wants to fight to the death with you. Palace Master Xian, I won't lose." Xian Hao frowned slightly, his eyes filled with unwillingness. "Don't worry, Yi Guqin won't be able to walk out of this arena today." Xian Tai secretly transmitted his voice. Xian Hao's expression changed slightly. He glanced at Yi Guqin, then measured the injuries on his body. If Yi Guqin fought to the death with him, he would definitely be the one at a disadvantage. "Do you dare?" Yi Guqin continued to ask. Xian Hao's expression froze. In the end, he didn't answer. It wasn't that Xian Hao didn't dare, but that he didn't think it was worth it. "Looks like you don't dare." Yi Guqin slowly shook his head, a hint of disappointment in his eyes. He had finally found an opponent, but the result was disappointing. Yi Guqin looked around. The prodigies who had lost to him were all staring at him with a sneer as if they were watching a good show. The real winner in the end had become the target of ridicule. Yi Guqin ignored them. Stepping on the blood-soaked ground, he walked step by step to the top of the pyramid. At this moment, even Xian Tai couldn't stop him because Feng Manlu was there. Moreover, Yi Guqin had already challenged Xian Hao. Since Xian Hao didn't answer, the final winner would naturally be Yi Guqin. No matter how they tried to twist the truth, this was the undeniable truth. Dong! Dong! The footsteps were like war drums, shaking everyone's hearts. Yi Guqin left bloody footprints with each step and finally stepped onto the top of the pyramid. At this moment, there was a ray of light in the sky. It broke through the thick clouds and shone on the top of the pyramid. It landed on the young man who was holding the Xianming heavy sword and was covered in blood. The tens of thousands of people present held their breaths as if they were waiting for something. Yi Guqin stood at the top of the pyramid with his heavy sword erected on the ground. Although his clothes were stained with blood, they were still so dazzling. "First place, I will be disrespectful." Chapter 432. Yi Guqin's voice was very calm. However, it contained a trace of arrogance, like the unyielding pride of a sword cultivator. His words were like a sudden clap of thunder that resounded throughout the entire martial arena. At this moment, almost everyone's gaze fell on the youth standing at the top of the pyramid. He was covered in blood and looked very miserable. However, at this moment, his figure was so dazzling. Yi Guqin. Yan Wushuang slightly raised her swan-like beautiful snow-white neck. At this moment, Yi Guqin's figure, who was standing at the peak, was really too dazzling. This caused the usually arrogant Yan Wushuang to involuntarily feel a little ashamed. Other than her father, Yan Changge, and Feng Manlu, there was finally a third man who could subdue Yan Wushuang. Senior brother Yi. The eyes of all the disciples in the sword sect pagoda were red. Yi Guqin fought so hard for the reputation of the sword sect pagoda, and even suffered from Xian Tai's shameless attack. Even so, Yiguchen was seriously injured and slandered, but he still wanted to win first place. This was his obsession. Born as a sword sect master. A disciple in the sword sect pagoda shouted with red eyes. Born as a sword sect master. As if a chain reaction, all the disciples in the sword sect pagoda shouted, feeling indignant for Yiguchen. Humph. Ridiculous. Xian Tai smiled coldly as he looked at the disciples in the sword sect pagoda, not caring at all. However, at this moment, some sporadic voices began to shout in the martial arts arena. Then, it spread out like a wildfire in a prairie. Born as a sword sect master. Gong Sun Xiaoya screamed. Gong Sun Xuanlong's expression changed slightly, but he sighed and did not say anything. Because this time, the limitless sword sect had gone too far. Born as a sword sect master. In the end, almost everyone in the arena, except for the limitless sword sect and other forces that were enemies of Yiguchen, shouted loudly. They were simply paying their respects to Yiguchen, the swordsman, and feeling indignant for him. The thunderous roar swept across the entire martial arena like a tidal wave. It even spread outside the martial arena. Almost half of northern Liang City could clearly hear the roar. In the arena, when Xian Tai saw this, his expression also became unsettled. He could ignore the sword sect's actions, but now, other than the few factions that were targeting Yiguchen, everyone else was loudly shouting the sword sect's name. This was an irresistible trend. This proved that Yiguchen's reputation in everyone's hearts had reached a peak. Xian Hao's face darkened. Now, Yiguchen stood at the top of the pyramid. His body was bathed in light, and he was incomparably dazzling. But not many people would remember the second place. However, Xian Hao was relieved in the blink of an eye, because he knew that Yiguchen had yet to pass the trial of death today. Yiguchen's expression was calm when he saw everyone's gaze converging on him and heard the cheers of the sword sect. He was the sword demon, and his heart was as calm as an ancient well. He did not like fame and fortune. Therefore, he was not happy about the cheers of tens of thousands of people. The only reason he was obsessed with winning the first place today was to help the sword sect's tower. After all, he was a disciple of the sword sect's tower and had enjoyed many opportunities in the sword sect's tower. Now was the time to repay them. Although the price of repayment was not small. Feeling the serious injuries in his body, Yiguchen sighed softly in his heart. Fortunately, he had taken out the sage-to-be pill from the bronze cauldron. Otherwise, his injuries would have been even more serious. But fortunately, Yiguchen had achieved his goal. Now, even the limitless sword sect and some other factions had to admit that Yiguchen was first place. Xian Hao was close behind and ranked second. The third place was LV Qinghan. As for the fourth place, Leng Zhu and the others originally had a chance, but because they had been severely injured by Yiguchen, Zhou Tong easily took it. But Zhou Tong's face did not look too good. Before the exchange began, he had confidently said to Zither Fairy that he could guarantee to be in the top 3. In the end, because of Yiguchen's sudden appearance, he only took 4th place. This result was not good in the middle. Moreover, Zither Fairy's gaze had been fixed on the figure standing proudly at the top of the crowd. Yiguchen, do you think you can walk out of the arena easily today? The glory will only last for a moment. Zhou Tong's face did not change, but his heart was cold. As the results of the exchange came out, the entire arena was in an uproar. Yiguchen deserved to be first place. However, although the exchange had ended, everyone present had a tacit understanding and did not choose to leave. Because they knew that the waves this time were far from over. Feng Manlu, now that the exchange is over, shouldn't the sword sect's tower give us an explanation? Xian Tai's voice was accompanied by the vast pressure of a divine dwelling expert, causing the entire noisy arena to fall silent again. Everyone's heart tightened. They knew that today's matter would not end well. You want the sword sect's tower Lin to give you an explanation? Feng Manlu's tone was very calm. But those familiar with Feng Manlu's character knew that the more he did not show his anger, the more terrifying he was. Yiguchen caused so much trouble in the Void Sword realm. It was rumored that he was dead, but since he's still alive, shouldn't you give us an explanation? Xian Tai's tone was ice-cold, tit for tat. That's right, the 3 imperial palaces also want an explanation. My poor disciple died to Yiguchen's despicable methods. The Yan Emperor of the 3 imperial palaces also stepped forward, releasing the pressure of a divine dwelling expert. The same goes for my Xingyuan Academy. Marquis Huntian stepped forward, his eyes cold. Don't forget that my disciple, Pan Shuoyan, also died tragically at the hands of Yiguchen. I heard that she suffered inhuman pain before she died. Yiguchen must apologize. I want him to kneel in front of Pan Shuoyan's tomb. Granny Shichuan also stepped forward. Her tone was ice-cold. She even wanted Yiguchen to kneel in front of Pan Shuoyan's tomb. Yiguchen's eyes were incomparably cold. Pan Shuoyan was a vicious woman. What value did she have to make Yiguchen kneel? At this moment, the 4 divine dwelling experts spoke in unison. They wanted to pressure the sword sect's Tower Lin. To everyone's surprise, Yu Bufan of the Sealed Blade King Hall, who had a deep grudge with the sword sect's Tower Lin, did not step forward to make things difficult for them. Although he and Feng Manlu were opponents, they appreciated each other's talents and did not want to step forward to add insult to injury. As for the sword sect's Tower Lin's side, only sect master Qing Yang of the 9 Profound sect was on the same side. Shameless. Don't you know what the disciples of the major forces did in the Void Sword realm? You clearly wanted to take advantage of your numbers to besiege senior brother Yi and junior sister Mu to seize the opportunity. Don't tell me you don't allow others to resist. An inner courtyard disciple who had participated in the Void Sword realm couldn't help but shout. It was clearly those forces who coveted Mu Xingzu's opportunity and had besieged her. Yiguchen had no choice but to intervene in order to protect Mu Xingzu. However, those people were still unwilling to let go. They were simply unwilling to let go. If Yiguchen had been soft-hearted and not ruthless, the ones who would have died in the end might have been Yiguchen and Mu Xingzu. If that had been the case, would the Limitless Sword sect and the other forces care about the deaths of Yiguchen and the others? As a result, the major forces had suffered great losses. Therefore, they blamed Yiguchen for all of this. Not to mention the sword sect's Tower Lin, even the majority of the people present felt that the major forces were being unreasonable. But so what? Divine dwelling experts had the confidence to invert right and wrong. Feng Manlu placed his hands behind his back as he sensed the heavy atmosphere. Although he was only at the spiritual bridge stage, he was able to withstand the pressure of the 4 divine dwelling experts. I only have one thing to say. Xian Tai, do you want to cripple your right hand or do you want me to cripple it personally? Chapter 433. Feng Manlu's tone was incomparably calm, as if he was talking about something very normal. However, the moment these words were spoken, the entire martial arts arena fell into a dead silence. Asking Xian Tai, a divine dwelling expert, to cripple his own arm, or personally cripple his arm. Let alone those at the spirit bridge stage, even those at the divine dwelling stage wouldn't dare to speak to Xian Tai in such a tone. Although Xian Tai had broken through to the divine dwelling stage not long ago, his strength wasn't that simple. He wasn't considered weak among divine dwelling experts. If Feng Manlu was still the sword king of the divine dwelling stage, no one would be surprised to hear such words. After all, Feng Manlu's strength was considered top tier among divine dwelling experts, and crippling Xian Tai's arm wouldn't be a big deal. However, Feng Manlu was only at the spirit bridge stage now. It wasn't as simple as fighting someone at a higher cultivation level. He had to completely defeat Xian Tai in order to cripple his arm. Some of the experts present, especially those who had attained the spirit bridge of heaven and earth, were astonished. They knew best how big the gap between them and the divine dwelling stage was. Oh, Feng Manlu, do you know how laughable your words are? Xian Tai laughed in anger. He couldn't do anything to Feng Manlu with his half-step divine dwelling stage cultivation in the heavenly wasteland plains. However, after breaking through to the divine dwelling stage, Xian Tai's confidence had swelled, and he no longer placed Feng Manlu in his eyes. Not only Xian Tai, but Marquis Huntian, Yan Emperor and Grandma Shichuan also snorted disdainfully at Feng Manlu's words. How arrogant were Xian Tai to challenge a divine dwelling stage expert with his spirit bridge stage cultivation and even cripple his arm. Feng Manlu, I'll give you two choices. The first is to hand over Yiguchen, or the second is for me to personally take action. Xian Tai stood in the air as the pressure of the divine dwelling stage poured out in all directions. When everyone saw this scene, they all sighed inwardly. If Feng Manlu hadn't lost his divine dwelling to that mysterious person 10 years ago at the Forbidden City Peak, his current cultivation would be far from what it was now, and he wouldn't be someone that a mere Xian Tai could challenge. Feng Manlu's expression was calm. His character had always been gentle. If it were any other time, Feng Manlu would have laughed it off. But this time, wind-sweeping building couldn't just brush it off. Xian Tai's intervention had severely injured Yiguchen, which was unforgivable for wind-sweeping tower. Not only was Yiguchen injured, but he was also provoking the Sword Sect's tower forest. Wind-sweeping building could ignore other people's slander, but it couldn't ignore the reputation of Yiguchen and Sword Sect Talon. Yiguchen is my successor, and he will replace me at the Forbidden City to fight against Yu Bufan's successor, Gu Zun. Therefore, no one is allowed to touch him today. Feng Manlu stepped into the air, his voice echoing throughout the arena. As soon as he said this, everyone was shocked. The summit of the Forbidden City. No wonder. Who would have thought that the obscure Sword King's final choice would actually be Yiguchen? The Forbidden Purple Summit is the most famous place in Saint Origin Dynasty for the duel. Every duel would attract the attention of the entire dynasty and even several neighboring dynasties. 10 years ago, I was fortunate enough to witness the duel between the sword and the saber at the Forbidden City. That duel overturned the heavens and earth, and even the sun and moon paled in comparison. I will never forget it for the rest of my life. Following Feng Manlu's words, the entire arena was in an uproar. Many life and death threshold experts and heaven and earth spiritual bridge experts had witnessed that duel. That was why they were shocked. 10 years had passed, and the duel between the sword and the saber would take place again at the Forbidden City. This was definitely a major piece of news that would cause great waves in Saint Origin Dynasty. Today, Feng Manlu had announced to the public that Yiguchen would replace him as the successor of the Forbidden City. Everyone knew that Yu Bufan's choice was only Gu Zun, the Saber Maniac. Sword Sect and Saber Maniac. Many people began to look forward to it. However, they knew that Yiguchen hadn't passed the death threshold yet. If he couldn't pass it, everything would be in vain. As for Yan Wushuang, after hearing Feng Manlu's words, a complicated look flashed across her beautiful eyes. Becoming the successor of Feng Manlu had always been her goal in cultivation. However, Yiguchen's performance had indeed convinced her completely. Therefore, she only sighed in her heart. She didn't have any feelings of dissatisfaction or jealousy. Hearing the uproar, Yiguchen was the calmest. He had already expected it, so he wasn't surprised at all. Feng Manlu, do you think I'll let bygones be bygones just because he's your successor? Today, I will make him pay the price. No one can stop me. If you interfere, I don't mind having one less Sword King in this world. Xian Tai's tone was cold and arrogant. His words enraged all the elders and disciples of Sword Sect Pagoda Forest. Xian Tai was completely condescending towards Feng Manlu. You're wrong. Feng Manlu faintly shook his head. Xian Tai frowned slightly. I'm not begging you to let Yiguchen go. I'm warning you. Feng Manlu didn't say anything else and directly made his move. Feng Manlu took a step forward. His imposing manner didn't show the slightest bit of anger. Compared to Xian Tai's vast divine dwelling stage pressure, Feng Manlu was like a small boat in the vast sea. Feng Manlu, since you overestimate yourself, don't blame me for not showing mercy. Xian Tai's eyes were filled with cold mockery. He couldn't wait for Feng Manlu to make a move. How happy would it be to trample the once invincible Sword King under his feet in front of so many people? However, was that really the case? Feng Manlu's face remained calm. He still didn't bring out a divine weapon, and only used his fingers as a sword. As he pointed his finger, the void boiled violently and countless rays of sword chi spread out. As soon as he made his move, Xian Tai's eyes flashed with surprise. Its power far exceeded the offensive power of an ordinary heaven and earth spirit bridge stage expert. But Xian Tai still didn't care. In his eyes, a divine dwelling stage expert should be able to crush a heaven and earth spirit bridge stage expert. Yin Yang sword seal. Xian Tai also didn't bring out a sword. Instead, he pinched a sword seal. 2 rays of sword chi, one white and one black, spread out, turning into a 100-foot-long sword of chi that cut through the world. Its power was so strong that it made people's hearts tremble. Is this the power of a divine dwelling stage expert? Many people were speechless, their hearts trembling. Even the people on the sword sect side were sweating for Feng Manlu. Feng Manlu could be said to be the belief of all the disciples of the sword sect. If he was defeated, it would definitely be a big blow to the sword sect. In the face of Xian Tai's move, Feng Manlu's figure was like a graceful swan, and his fingers were like a sword. With a point of his finger, tens of thousands of swords swept out. The void shattered, and sword chi swept across. Boom! Berserk sword chi spread out in all directions. Feng Manlu didn't fall into the slightest disadvantage against Xian Tai. How is this possible? How can your sword move be so powerful? Xian Tai couldn't believe it. He couldn't believe that even if he broke through to the divine dwelling stage, he still couldn't crush Feng Manlu. I've long said that the divine dwelling stage is just so. At this moment, Feng Manlu was dressed in a simple cloth robe, and his posture was elegant. His whole person seemed to have turned into a sword. The person was the sword, and the sword was the person. 10 years of accumulating a sword, and the frost blade has never been tested. Today, I will use the blood of a divine dwelling stage expert to baptize my sword. As Feng Manlu spoke, a green longsword seemed to emerge from his body. The sword chi was magnificent, cutting the heavens above and shaking the underworld below. With one sword, the heavens trembled. Chapter 434. At this moment, all the spectators in the arena were looking at Feng Manlu, who was standing in the sky. A green longsword emerged from his body. The strangest thing was that the sword was not real, but translucent. It spread out from Feng Manlu's body and instantly grew to a height of 100 feet. Feng Manlu was in the center of the green sword, like the king of swords. That's the divine wind sword. Yu Bufan's eyes narrowed. As Feng Manlu's opponent, he was very familiar with the green longsword. It was Feng Manlu's personal sword, the divine wind sword. Feng Manlu had actually fused his former sword into his body. He was the sword, and the sword was him. This was called the union of man and sword. Yi Guqian, who was watching the battle, was also amazed. Feng Manlu had been in seclusion in the sword sect pagoda for 10 years. Not only had he comprehended the union of man and sword to a very high level, but he had also merged his own sword into it. At this moment, Feng Manlu's entire body was the divine wind sword. The divine wind sword was his body. Yi Guqian instantly felt that this was similar to the forbidden forging technique, which used the human soul to refine the sword. Everyone in the arena was shocked, and Xian Tai's eyes were filled with disbelief. Feng Manlu, who had brought out the divine wind sword, gave him an extreme sense of danger. How is this possible? You're only at the spiritual bridge stage. Xian Tai also brought out his own sword. As the sword slashed out, the terrifying true chi of a divine dwelling stage expert surged out and swept across the sky. However, Feng Manlu did not move at all. He casually stepped out and the divine wind sword moved with his body. Why do we need to compete in the sword Tao? 1,000 fingers, 10,000 seals. Can you ask for the pinnacle of the world? 3 feet of autumn water untainted by dust, unparalleled in the world. Feng Manlu recited a poem in his free time, and his sword danced in the sky. With a point of his finger, the divine wind sword cut through the sky, and the clouds in the sky changed color. A green sword radiance seemed to have merged with the wind, drawing a ripple in the void. Mark of wind. Feng Manlu's 3 words, the winner and loser. Puff. A right arm, along with blood splattering out. The blood of a divine dwelling stage expert stained the divine wind sword, making the sword's edge even more cold. The entire martial arena was in a state of stunned silence. Before Xian Tai could even react, his right hand that was holding the sword had already disappeared. This. Xian Tai was completely dumbfounded, unable to think. Just now, when Feng Manlu pointed his finger, he could only vaguely see a green sword shadow attacking him. Then, his right hand that was holding the sword was separated from his body. What kind of speed was this? Not to mention the others, even all the elders and disciples of the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest were incomparably stunned. Many of the disciples had only heard of wind sweeping buildings' glorious past but had not witnessed it with their own eyes. Therefore, they did not know the true strength of wind sweeping building. They had no idea that Feng Manlu, who was always in seclusion in the Sword Sect Pagoda and had a gentle temperament, would be so powerful and terrifying. This arm once injured a disciple of my Sword Sect's Pagoda Forest. Now, it's crippled. Feng Manlu's tone was cold and indifferent. With his hands behind his back, he stood in the sky. The shadow of the divine wind sword could be vaguely seen on his straight torso. It looked extremely sharp and extraordinary, and it was full of loftiness. Previously, when Yiguchen stood at the top of the pyramid, he shone with boundless radiance. But now, Feng Manlu, who was leisurely reciting poems and cutting off the arm of a divine palace expert, was unparalleled under the heavens with his sword. Once. Now. The lightless sword king, Feng Manlu, was still as powerful as ever. Feng Manlu, sweeping up the yellow sand, dancing with the sword in spring and autumn, his name shakes the world. Someone exclaimed in amazement. 10 years ago, when Feng Manlu had appeared out of nowhere, someone had praised Feng Manlu's unparalleled sword skills with this poem. After 10 years of silence, he appeared again today. Cutting down a divine palace expert with one sword, shocking the world once again. Do you still want to ask me for the person? Feng Manlu's tone was as calm as water. His empty eyes swept across the Yan Emperor, Marquis Huntian, Grandma Shichuan, and the others. Feng Manlu, you. Grandma Shichuan and the others were stunned, their faces alternating between green and white. They had been so arrogant before, twisting black and white. Grandma Shichuan had even wanted Yiguchen to kneel in front of Pan Shulian's tomb to repent. But now, Grandma Shichuan and the others felt as if their necks were being strangled. They couldn't make a sound. Their faces were red with anger, but they didn't dare to say anything. Their strength was comparable to Xian Tai's. Xian Tai had been utterly defeated by Feng Manlu. They didn't stand a chance either. Grandma Shichuan and the others' eyes flashed. They seemed to want to attack together. Feng Manlu's face was calm, as if he didn't care about their alliance. At this moment, Sect Master Qingyang stepped forward. Although he didn't say anything, his attitude was obvious. Grandma Shichuan and the others' faces sank. If Sect Master Qingyang were to intervene, then their alliance would be meaningless. Xian Tai was in a daze. His left hand was clutching his severed arm. Previously, he had used his right hand to strike out and severely injure Yiguchen. And now, his right arm had been severed. Xian Tai gritted his teeth so hard that they almost shattered. His face was so dark that it was terrifying. Feng Manlu, your cultivation has returned to the divine dwelling stage. Everyone else also pricked up their ears. If Feng Manlu's cultivation hadn't reached the divine dwelling stage, how could he have so easily severed Xian Tai's arm? Feng Manlu indifferently said, "Do I need a divine dwelling stage cultivation to kill you?" Feng Manlu's words made Xian Tai groan in anger. He almost vomited 3 liters of blood. Everyone in the arena was speechless. Although Feng Manlu had been silent for 10 years, his arrogance hadn't diminished in the slightest. However, Ye Guqin was the only one who had observed the battle the most carefully. After all, he had a deep understanding of the sword. Coupled with the sword demon's vision, he was able to see the clues. First of all, it was because Feng Manlu's understanding of man and sword had reached an extremely profound level. After comprehending man and sword as one, he was invincible among those of the same level, and even had the ability to challenge those of a higher level. Second, the quality of the divine wind sword was most likely not low. It had reached the pinnacle of divine rune weapons. After 10 years of nourishment in Feng Manlu's body, the sword's power could shake the 9 heavens when it was unsheathed. Third, the grade of the sword move, wind mark, wasn't low either. Ye Guqin estimated that the power of wind mark was most likely close to the level of an emperor-level sword art. An ordinary king-level sword art couldn't be compared to wind mark. Even Ye Guqin's god-killing sword art was most likely only the final 6th move could compete with wind mark. In addition, Feng Manlu had thoroughly comprehended the wind sword Dao. Together with wind mark, Feng Manlu's sword was as fast as a ghost. It was as though it was shuttling through the void, leaving Xian Tai no time to react. Ye Guqin finally understood why Yan Wushuang was able to comprehend the wind sword intent. It turned out that she had inherited it from Feng Manlu. What Feng Manlu had comprehended was the complete wind sword Dao, which was more powerful than the wind sword intent. All these reasons combined allowed Feng Manlu's sword to directly cut off the arm of a divine dwelling stage expert. This sword could be said to be an interpretation of the true essence of Feng Manlu's sword Dao. It was impossible to measure the power of this sword with one's cultivation level. Xian Tai's defeat wasn't unjustified. Chapter 435. Even Ye Guqin couldn't help but praise Feng Manlu's wind mark. It was a perfect fusion of man and sword as one, as well as the wind sword Dao. It could also be said to be a move that maximized the speed of the sword. Even from the perspective of Ye Guqin's sword demon, this sword move was very stunning. Feng Manlu was indeed worthy of his title as the King of Swords. Feng Manlu blocked all the attacks by himself. Although he didn't exert any pressure, Xian Wushuang were still shocked. Even so, Granny Shichuan and the other divine dwelling experts had ugly expressions on their faces. They didn't dare to do anything excessive. This was the superiority brought by strength. As long as you were strong enough, no one would dare to refute you even if you tried to distort the truth. If you weren't strong enough, you wouldn't be able to defend yourself even if you were in the right. At this moment, Ye Guqin's will to chase after the strongest became even stronger. He knew that his cultivation might be one of the best among the younger generation, but it wasn't enough when compared to the true experts. I need to be stronger, Ye Guqin thought. He wasn't the kind of person who was used to relying on others. Even if Feng Manlu helped him this time, what about the next time? True confidence came from one's own strength and foundation, not from external forces. Since none of you have any objections, this exchange is over, Feng Manlu said indifferently. He had previously asked Grandma Shichuan and the others if they still wanted to capture Ye Guqin, but no one dared to reply. Since that was the case, Feng Manlu didn't want to waste any more time. After all, Xian Tai had already paid the price of an arm. Feng Manlu turned to Ye Guqin and said, Ye Guqin, I only cut off Xian Tai's arm. Are you unhappy? Feng Manlu didn't try to hide his words, nor did he lower his voice. His words could be heard throughout the arena. The noisy crowd fell silent once again. Some of them were dumbfounded. Did Feng Manlu really want to kill Xian Tai? Although he did have the ability to do so, given the strength he had displayed. Xian Tai's face was cold to the extreme. He gritted his teeth, and his body was trembling because of his anger. Feng Manlu didn't take him, a divine-dwelling expert, seriously at all. However, Xian Tai had never taken Feng Manlu seriously before. Now that their identities were reversed, Xian Tai found it hard to accept. Yi Guchen's eyes flashed. He shook his head and said, "Thank you, Senior Feng, for standing up for me. However, there is no need for that. This is my personal grudge. I will settle it myself in the future." Yi Guchen's tone was very natural and calm, as if he was talking about something very normal. However, this caused the entire martial arts club to fall into a deathly silence. With his divine soul cultivation, he dared to say that he would personally deal with a divine-dwelling expert in the future. However, there wasn't the slightest bit of arrogance in his tone, as if it was a matter of course. This, as expected of the Sword King's successor. He really has the arrogance of someone from the same bloodline. Some people were dumbstruck and bitterly smiled. However, they weren't too suspicious. Given the talent Yi Guchen had displayed so far, if he did not die prematurely, there was indeed a possibility for him to become a divine-dwelling expert in the future. Little bastard. Xian Tai's face turned purple. It was one thing for Feng Manlu to speak like that, but even a junior at the Divine Soul stage dared to look down on him. This caused Xian Tai's killing intent to soar. Feng Manlu said indifferently, "Xian Tai, I'm warning you. If you dare to lower yourself and kill Yi Guchen, Feng Manlu will be the first to kill you no matter where you are." He paused for a moment, then continued in a clear voice that spread throughout the entire martial arts arena. "I, Feng Manlu, will not only say this to Xian Tai, but also to all forces and people at the Divine Soul stage and above. If anyone dares to attack Yi Guchen, I, Feng Manlu, will not show any mercy." Feng Manlu's voice was calm, but it was as mighty as an imperial edict. He had said that no force or expert could kill Yi Guchen. Of course, Feng Manlu would naturally not interfere if they were of the same generation and level. Yi Guchen knew that Feng Manlu was guaranteeing him that he would not be threatened by Grandma Shichuan and the others. As expected, the eyes of Grandma Shichuan and the other divine-dwelling experts flickered. With Feng Manlu's words, it was unlikely that they would personally deal with Yi Guchen. At least on the surface, no one would dare to casually attack Yi Guchen. Good, very good. Feng Manlu, Sect Master will not let you off so easily. Xian Tai's face was extremely cold. The Sect Master he spoke of was naturally Xian Wuji. As the Sect Master of the Limitless Sword Sect, his cultivation could be said to be at the top of the Divine Dwelling stage. You can go back and tell Xian Wuji that I have to thank him. If he had not secretly attacked me 10 years ago in the Violet Forbidden City, I would not have been able to comprehend the unity of man and sword in the Sword Sect Pagoda, Feng Manlu said indifferently. These words were like a heavy bomb that caused an uproar in the entire arena. Many people began to ponder. Some of them had heard that the mysterious masked man who had secretly attacked Feng Manlu after the battle in the Violet Forbidden City, causing Feng Manlu's divine dwelling to be destroyed, was the sect master of the Limitless Sword Sect, Xian Wuji. Of course, because there was no clear evidence and the Limitless Sword Sect refused to admit it, not many people believed it. But now that Feng Manlu had personally said it, did it mean that this was the truth? Feng Manlu, I admit that you're not weak, but that's not a reason for you to slander me. The sect leader is so narrow-minded. Why would he stoop so low to attack you? Ridiculous. Xian Tai's eyes flickered, but he was in a hurry to refute. Let alone outsiders, even he, the Sun Moon Hall master, did not know whether Xian Wuji was the culprit or not. However, it was not impossible. But Xian Tai wanted to protect the reputation of the Limitless Sword Sect and Xian Wuji, so he would not admit to it. Feng Manlu shook his head. He did not mind. He would have an end to this matter, but not now. At this point, the competition had come to an end. However, everyone knew in their hearts that the Sword Sect's Tower Forest was the one that truly shocked the world in this exchange. After the exchange, there were only two names that could be spread out. The Sword Sect, Yi Guqin. The Sword King, Feng Manlu. As for the Limitless Sword Sect, regardless of whether it was the top genius, Xian Hao, or the Sun Moon Hall Master, Xian Tai, their reputations would be damaged. Especially Xian Hao, who had dominated the dynasty and was undefeated. However, just when everyone thought that the competition had finally come to an end, a figure appeared in the arena. Outside the arena, there was a figure dragging a corpse as he slowly stepped into the arena. At this moment, most of the people in the arena were focused on Yi Guqin, Feng Manlu, and the others. But when the figure appeared in the arena, almost immediately, there were people who looked at him. Then, their eyes were filled with surprise. More and more people's gazes shifted to that figure. That corpse is from the barbarian tribe. I didn't expect him to come, and he even brought a corpse from the barbarian tribe. What's the meaning of this? Many people looked at the figure, then turned to Yi Guqin. It seemed that his arrival was not a coincidence. Instead, they were targeting Yi Guqin, who had a great reputation. Chapter 436. Looking at the figure who was dragging the barbarian's corpse, the noisy arena quieted down. It was a young man with a slender figure. He was wearing the 9 Serenities dragon armor, which was black and translucent. There were spiritual tattoo formations engraved on the armor with amazing defensive power. Obviously, it was an excellent defensive divine weapon. His hair was as black as ink and his face was handsome. His lips were thin and slightly pursed. There was an indescribable domineering aura around him, as if he was a battle king. He was holding a blood-stained golden overlord halberd in one hand and dragging the barbarian's corpse with the other. The ground was stained with blood as he walked. The person who came was none other than the leader of the 3 imperial palaces. The young war emperor, Yang Haozong. As one of the top geniuses of the 3 imperial palaces, he was also one of the top geniuses of the Saint Origin dynasty. Previously, in the Void Sword realm, he had proudly said that Ji Yan, who was killed by Yi Guqin, only had 1/10 of his strength. However, not many people doubted his words because the young war emperor was publicly acknowledged as the strongest genius. He wasn't ranked first in terms of cultivation but in terms of combat strength. This meant that the young war emperor possessed a rare offensive strength. Not to mention other aspects, it was hard to find someone who could match him in terms of combat strength. After all, his master, the war emperor of the 3 imperial palaces, was also an unparalleled divine palace expert. The reason why the young war emperor was late wasn't because he wanted to be late. It was because he received a message from Zhou Tong. With Zhou Tong's shrewdness, he didn't want Yi Guqin to become famous today. Therefore, he needed someone to suppress him. Zhou Tong wouldn't do it himself, so he could only secretly send a message to the young war emperor. Zhou Tong knew the young war emperor's unruly character. He naturally wouldn't let go of the chance to clash with Yi Guqin. At this moment, the young war emperor looked around and said coldly, "Looks like I missed a good show. Yang Haozong, why did you only come now? If you weren't late, would the first place of the exchange be taken by a mediocre person?" Yan Emperor suddenly said. His words were filled with sarcasm. Obviously, he was saying that if the young war emperor wasn't late, the first place of the exchange would be him and not Yi Guqin. The word mediocre was incomparably piercing. The Sword Sect's forest of pagodas stared coldly at the Flame Emperor. Right now, Yi Guqin was practically the signature of the Sword Sect pagoda forest. Insulting Yi Guqin was equivalent to insulting the Sword Sect pagoda forest. "Flame Emperor, watch your words," Feng Manlu said indifferently. The Flame Emperor's face stiffened. However, he had no choice but to shut his mouth as he felt extremely aggrieved. A divine dwelling expert was actually threatened by the World Spirit Bridge. The little war emperor's eyes flickered slightly. Zhou Tong had already told him about this matter in his message. "The reason why I've come late is because I want to do my best to attack the barbarian race. I'm not like some other forces. They're trying their best to fight for the first place. That would only make them look ridiculous. After the young war emperor finished speaking, he threw the corpse of the barbarian tribe out and said in a clear voice, "This is the bone demon, holy son of the bone barbarian tribe." On the way here, he passed by a city and saw this man leading a group of bone barbarian tribe's totem warriors on a killing spree, so he killed him. The young war emperor's tone and expression were indifferent, as if killing a saint was just a small matter. However, this caused a huge commotion in the arena. That was a barbarian tribe's holy son. Although there were differences in cultivation between the barbarian tribe's holy sons and holy daughters. But no matter what, since he was a holy son, he must have some outstanding strength. He definitely wouldn't be killed so easily. Even if it was a top-notch genius, it would be extremely difficult for him to kill a barbarian tribe's holy son. The young war emperor casually killed a holy son and spoke in such an indifferent tone. Everyone was shocked. However, there were also people who noticed the young war emperor's words. When he said that he would do his best to fight for the first place, he was undoubtedly mocking Yiguchen. What was even more amazing was that the young war emperor mentioned that he was trying his best to eradicate the barbarian tribe. In addition, he brought the corpse of the bone demon holy son, which made people unable to refute him. This was equivalent to letting everyone think that the young war emperor was a righteous person who didn't care about participating in the exchange just to kill the barbarian tribe. And Yiguchen became a despicable person who fought for the first place for fame and fortune. It seems like what the young war emperor said is true. Although Yiguchen is worthy of respect, it's for the sword sect's tower forest. The young war emperor killed the barbarian tribe for the dynasty and the ordinary people. Some people were like fence-sitters and whispered to each other. Feng Manlu frowned slightly when he saw the faint discussion, but he wouldn't argue with a junior. On the other hand, Yan Wushuang, Chu Qingqi, Yi Xia, and the others felt that the young war emperor's words were too harsh. Yang Haozong, why didn't you say such words when you won the first place in the exchange? Now that Yiguchen has won the first place, are you so jealous? Yan Wushuang couldn't stand it anymore and said coldly. Ha! What a pity. The sword sect's tower forest's genius, who is as famous as me, is now in the second place and speaking for someone else. The young war emperor was cold and disdainful. He didn't care about Yan Wushuang's words at all. Instead, he wanted to sow discord. You. Yan Wushuang was speechless. Yiguchen frowned slightly. The young war emperor seemed to be incomparably overbearing, but he was actually as shrewd as Zhou Tong. Moreover, Yiguchen could feel that the young war emperor's strength was indeed formidable. However, Yiguchen couldn't allow others to slander the sword sect's tower forest's reputation. Is it very powerful to kill a barbarian tribe saint? Yiguchen stood out and said lightly. As soon as he said that, the whispers in the arena instantly stopped. They all looked at Yiguchen. Sword sect Yi, you're wrong. Although you're from the sword sect, you can't insult Brother Yang's achievements. The barbarian tribe saint isn't that easy to kill. Zhou Tong took a step forward and said while waving his folding fan. Since the young war emperor had stood out to suppress him, he naturally had to support him from the side. Yiguchen, you're really a frog at the bottom of a well. I guess you haven't even met a barbarian tribe's totem warrior, let alone know how powerful the barbarian tribe's saint is. Princess Yuan, she said sarcastically. She was once stepped on by Yiguchen, so she naturally hated Yiguchen. She was just worried that she couldn't find a chance to deal with Yiguchen. Now that the young war emperor was here, she could vent her anger, even if it was just to disgust Yiguchen a little. Yiguchen, the young war emperor killed the barbarian tribe's saint. It's a great achievement. You only know how to fight among yourselves. How can you be so ruthless to us who are on the same side? Ren Tingting, who had fainted after being kicked by Yiguchen, had also regained her consciousness. She sneered at Yiguchen. I'm not on the same side as you. Moreover, I don't think that killing the barbarian tribe's saint is a big deal. Yiguchen said indifferently. Yiguchen, although you've won first place in the exchange, you can't be so arrogant. Do you think that killing the barbarian tribe saint is a big deal? Grandma Shichuan scolded coldly. It's just the ignorant words of a junior. Yan Emperor, Lord Huntian, and the others also scolded Yiguchen, as if they were scolding an incompetent junior. At this moment, even some people in the arena looked at Yiguchen with a slightly different gaze. Killing the barbarian tribe saint was a great achievement and a great kindness. What more a saint? It was inappropriate for Yiguchen to say such words. Even Yan Wushuang and the others were anxious. Yiguchen just said something wrong. Yan Wushuang explained. Oh, now you're looking for an excuse. The young war emperor said coldly. I didn't say anything wrong. Killing the barbarian tribe saint isn't a big deal, Yiguchen said. Yiguchen. Yan Wushuang glared at Yiguchen. She was helping Yiguchen out of his predicament, but Yiguchen didn't appreciate it. Yiguchen didn't care about Yan Wushuang's hint. His face was calm as he wiped his origin ring. A command medallion carved from blood jade appeared in his hand. It was the saint token he had picked up after killing the Xueling saint. Because I've killed a saint before, I don't think that killing a saint is a big deal, or is it that this year's casual actions are actually a world-shaking matter? Everyone fell silent when they heard this. Chapter 437. Everyone's expression froze as they stared at the token in Yiguchen's hand. It's the saint's token. Some people exclaimed. Some of the higher-ups of the barbarian tribe, such as the saint, saintess, priest, elder, and so on, had their own identity tokens. These identity tokens were their personal belongings. Even if they died, they would be buried with them. It was impossible for them to lose or abandon them. Since this saint's token appeared in Yiguchen's hand, it was obviously impossible for him to have picked it up or given it to him. There could only be one reason. Yiguchen had to kill the Holy Sun with his own hands to obtain the Holy Sun token. At the thought of this, many people who were fence-sitters lowered their heads in shame. They thought that Yiguchen had done his best to win first place in the exchange. In the end, he had already fought with the barbarian tribe and even killed a saint. Yan Wushuang's face was a little red. She realized that she had underestimated this sword master again. She thought that Yiguchen had said something wrong and wanted to help him out. In the end, he really spoke the truth. This made Yan Wushuang feel a little embarrassed. She couldn't help but glance at Yiguchen. This guy never played by the rules. The faces of those who had spoken against Yiguchen were burning at this moment. Princess Yuan Shi once said that Yiguchen was a frog at the bottom of a well who had never even seen a totem warrior. In the end, the saint's token was like a heavy slap to her face. Ren Tingting also looked a little resentful. She thought that she could hit him when he was down, but in the end, she was the one who was humiliated. As for Zhou Tong, although he was a shrewd person who didn't show his emotions, he also looked a little unnatural. Obviously, he didn't expect that Yiguchen had also killed a saint. To think that he had previously said how difficult it was to kill a saint, and that killing a saint would be a great achievement. In the end, wouldn't Yiguchen have the same achievement now? When he thought up to here, Zhou Tong pondered for a moment and said, I never expected that the sword sect would actually possess such ability. It's truly praiseworthy. However, killing a holy sun is no small matter. I hope that senior can verify the authenticity of the Holy Sun medallion. Zhou Tong was really puzzled. How did Yiguchen kill a saint without a sound? He was a little puzzled. Zhou Tong, what do you mean? Yan Wushuang glared at him. Very clearly, Zhou Tong felt that Yiguchen's Holy Sun token might not necessarily be real. Yiguchen's brows also furrowed slightly. He could sense that Zhou Tong was targeting him. However, other than Ji Yan's enmity with Zhou Tong, there shouldn't be any other grievances between him and Zhou Tong. Moreover, Yiguchen didn't think that Zhou Tong and Ji Yan's relationship was that good. Why is Zhou Tong targeting me? Is it just because of the grudge between the three imperial palaces? Yi Guqin thought to himself. However, since they had reached this point, a senior at the life and death chamber stepped forward and verified Yi Guqin's Holy Sun medallion. This Holy Sun medallion should be real. Looking at his identity, he should be the blood barbarian tribe's Xueling Holy Sun, said the senior. With that, the fact that Yi Guqin had killed a Holy Sun couldn't be refuted. Grandma Shichuan and the others' faces turned ashen. To think that they had berated Yi Guqin before, thinking that he was arrogant and didn't care about the Little War Emperor's achievements. Now that Yi Guqin had also made a contribution, the Divine Palace experts were speechless. Yi Guqin, since you've killed a Holy Sun, why didn't you report it? Could it be that you're deliberately toying with us? The Flame Emperor said angrily. He thought that the Little War Emperor's achievement of killing a Holy Sun would suppress Yi Guqin's reputation. In the end, it made Yi Guqin's reputation even greater. I've said before that I don't think that killing a Holy Sun is a great achievement. It's just something I did casually. Therefore, I naturally didn't have any intention of publicizing it. If I had known earlier, I might have acted like the Little War Emperor and showed it off, Yi Guqin said indifferently. When these words came out, many inner courtyard disciples in the Sword Sect's forest of pagodas revealed mocking smiles. These words were like a ruthless slap to the Little War Emperor's face. He had dragged the Holy Sun's corpse over, but now he was showing off. The Little War Emperor's face also turned solemn. However, his temperament wasn't that shallow and he was able to keep his composure. However, there was no doubt that he was the one who had lost face today. Yi Guqin, what's the point of speaking so quickly? Do you dare to fight with me? The Little War Emperor waved the Overlord halberd in his hand and an unparalleled gale poured out in all directions. The Little War Emperor was definitely a top-notch genius. He was on par with Xian Hao, LV Qinghan, Gu Zun and the others. Are you lying through your teeth? Didn't you see Yi Guqin's injuries? Yan Wushuang stepped out and shouted coldly. Yi Guqin was injured in the battle with Xian Hao and was heavily injured by Xian Tai's palm strike. Anyone with a discerning eye could see that Yi Guqin's condition wasn't good and he needed to rest. However, the Little War Emperor actually dared to issue a challenge at this moment. I didn't ask you, the Little War Emperor shouted coldly and his black eyes fell on Yi Guqin. This is too unfair. Does the Little War Emperor still have any shame? Gongsun Xiaoye said angrily. There were many people who had the same thoughts as her. Yi Guqin was already heavily injured and he still had the face to issue a challenge. Your martial path is to take advantage of others when they are in danger. Yi Guqin said coldly. The heart of martial path is to press forward courageously. Even if you are heavily injured, you still have to fight. This is the heart of an expert. It seems like Yi Guqin, you're retreating. The Little War Emperor stared coldly and then shook his head in disappointment. Yi Guqin, I thought you would be a strong opponent for me, Yang Haotsang. But now, you don't even have the courage to fight. How disappointing. In the Sword Sect's forest of pagodas, Yan Wushuang and the others were so angry that their teeth were chattering. If you have the guts, you should also be heavily injured and then fight with senior brother Yi when he is in his peak condition. Do you dare? Some inner courtyard disciples said angrily. I, the Little War Emperor, will fight to the end even if I have to bleed my last drop of blood. The Little War Emperor said arrogantly. The inner courtyard disciples were completely speechless. It seemed like even if the Little War Emperor had to lose his face today, he still had to suppress Yi Guqin's spirit. If Yi Guqin didn't accept the challenge, even if everyone knew that it was because he was heavily injured, it would still lessen their impression of Yi Guqin. This was the plan that Zhou Tong had secretly suggested to the Little War Emperor. Yi Guqin, you only have two choices now. First, you don't accept the challenge, which will leave a bad impression on others. They will think that you are a coward. But if you accept the challenge, you will be completely defeated by Yang Haotsang in your current state. It will be even more miserable. How do you deal with this move? Zhou Tong waved the folding fan in his hand and a faint smile appeared in his eyes. He was known for his shrewdness and scheming. With just a small trick, he had already forced Yiguchen into a passive state. Not only Zhou Tong, everyone in the square was also paying attention to Yiguchen. They all wanted to know how Yiguchen, who was heavily injured, would handle the pressure from the little war emperor. Feeling their gazes, Yiguchen's face remained calm. He said indifferently, "If what you said is true, that I, Yiguchen, won first place because of internal strife, why don't we have a competition against the barbarian tribe? Let's see who can kill more saints." Chapter 438. Yiguchen's words shocked everyone in the arena. Competing to see who could kill more saints. Was he treating the barbarian saints like pigs? Although the barbarian saints and saintesses were both strong and weak, they had awakened the supreme totem. None of them were easy to deal with. In the past battles between the top prodigies of the 7 major forces and the barbarian saints and saintesses, it was not the barbarians who were at a disadvantage, but the prodigies of the 7 major forces. Not only were there ordinary saints and saintesses in the barbarian tribe, but there was also a double crown king, who was a triple crown king. It was said that there was a quadruple crown king among the barbarian tribe, who was extremely powerful. Even the top prodigies did not dare to say that they could kill a saint as a condition of the competition. Yiguchen, do you think you are invincible just because you killed a saint by luck? Have you seen the real prodigies of the barbarian tribe? Princess Yuan, she did not like Yiguchen's arrogant tone. The ignorant are fearless. You are so confident just because you killed a saint, Ren Tingting said coldly. They all thought that Yiguchen was lucky to kill the saint of Xueling. The saint of the barbarian tribe was not so easy to kill. They did not know that Yiguchen had killed the holy son of Xueling so quickly that he was not injured at all. Okay, although you don't dare to fight with me, it doesn't matter. We will compete according to what you said, lest people say that I, Yang Haotsang, bullied you. Then let's set a limit of 1 month. After the war with the barbarian tribe, we will count the merits every month. We will come again next month and see who killed more saints and saintesses. The young war emperor also accepted Yiguchen's challenge without hesitation. But when he said this, it sounded as if Yiguchen did not dare to compete with him, so he could only help Yiguchen. I really want to punch that little war emperor in the face. Yi Xia curled his lips unhappily. Me too. Chu Qingqi nodded in agreement. The young war emperor was indeed asking for a beating. However, his strength was indeed enough to overwhelm his peers. He saw that the sword sect's Yiguchen and the junior war emperor, Yang Haotsang, had agreed to a duel. The spectators in the entire fighting arena were also somewhat moved. Some of them even began to consider placing their bets to see who would win. However, the majority of the people were still optimistic about the young war emperor. It wasn't that they thought Yiguchen was weaker than the young war emperor. Instead, Yiguchen was severely injured. According to their calculations, it would take at least half a month for him to recover from his injuries. How many saints and saintesses would they be able to find in the remaining time? Even if he found them, would he be able to kill them all? On the other hand, the young war emperor was in his peak condition and could make full use of this 1 month's time. No matter what, he would gain much more than Yiguchen. Thus, to many people, the outcome of this competition was more or less certain. However, what everyone didn't know was that Yiguchen's recovery speed far exceeded that of ordinary people. Moreover, he had been hit by the blood barbarian tribe's kill talisman. It had only been a few days since the 1-month deadline. As long as Yiguchen stepped out of the safe area outside northern Liang City, the saints and saintesses of the blood barbarian tribe would attack him. Yiguchen's strange fire and strange thunder were the ultimate weapons that could completely restrain the blood barbarian tribe. Therefore, Yiguchen proposed this duel because he was fully confident of winning. It was ridiculous that Princess Yuanxi, Ren Tingting, and the others still thought that Yiguchen was overestimating himself. Only Zhou Tong frowned slightly. He didn't believe that Yiguchen would rashly propose such a duel condition. Yiguchen, what are you planning? Or are you sure you will win? Zhou Tong thought to himself. He was probably the person in the entire fighting arena who looked down on Yi Guqin the least. Since it's a duel, it's a bit boring without a stake. I, the young war emperor, will bet a green wood heart, a divine item of the wood element. I wonder if Yi Guqin has something of the same value. The young war emperor thought that he already had the upper hand and wanted to expand the benefits. He immediately took out a divine item that was about the size of a fist and looked like a heart. It shone with green light like a green pith. It's a rare divine item of the wood element. The young war emperor's green wood heart caused an uproar. In the land of 5 elements of the barbarian tribe, the most famous treasures were the 5 elements divine items. They were divine items that contained the elements of metal, wood, water, fire, and earth. They were greatly beneficial to martial artists who practiced martial arts of the same element. For example, if a martial artist of the wood element obtained the green wood heart, his cultivation speed would increase exponentially. The 5 elements divine items were rare treasures that were hard to come by. They were extremely rare even in the land of 5 elements. Yi Guqin's eyes lit up slightly because he felt that the wood azure dragon totem in his 5-colored golden core was trembling slightly. Could it be that the 5 elements divine items are helpful for the awakening of the 5-colored totem? This unexpected discovery made Yi Guqin slightly happy. After awakening the 5-colored totem, one could comprehend the corresponding sword essence. If one comprehended the 5 ordinary sword essences of metal, wood, water, fire, and earth, when combined together, it would be the peerless 5 elements sword essence. It seems that in order to help awaken the azure dragon totem, I must obtain the green wood heart. Yi Guqin thought to himself and then said, okay, then I'll bet a quasi-sage elixir and a leaf of enlightenment. After saying that, Yi Guqin also took out a quasi-sage elixir and a leaf of enlightenment. These 2 treasures were also rare items. Together, they were worth about the same as the green wood heart. These treasures would tempt even the spiritual bridge of heaven and earth experts. The competition this time was going to be interesting. Everyone was thinking that the losing side would not only lose their reputation. Since the bet has been made, then it's settled. Yi Guqin, don't disappoint me. If the gap is too big, I will feel bored. The young war emperor said indifferently and then turned to leave. I will be here in a month. Queen Yuanxi, Ren Tingting, Ling Zhu, Xian Feng, Xian Dai, and the others looked coldly at Yi Guqin. They could not wait to see Yi Guqin's miserable state of losing his reputation and treasures in a month's time. At this point, the exchange had come to an end. However, what happened in the exchange would obviously spread throughout the Great Desolate Prefecture and then the Saint Origin dynasty. After the meeting, Zhou Tong still wanted to invite Zither Fairy to House Yunyan for a gathering but was rejected by Zither Fairy. Now, she was only worried about Yi Guqin's injuries. I'm sorry, I still have something to do. Zither Fairy chased after the crowd of Sword Sect Pagoda Forest. Zhou Tong took a deep breath and did not lose his composure. Sigh, Zhou Tong, your love rival has appeared. LV Qinghan walked up and sighed. Senior sister LV, I think Yi Guqin doesn't seem to care about junior sister LV. Is junior sister LV's wishful thinking? Zhou Tong said indifferently. I will ask about this matter. Yi Guqin has no feelings for junior sister LV but he still made junior sister LV so infatuated. I will advise Yi Guqin to break off his relationship with Zither Fairy and let her find her own happiness. LV Qinghan said. Thank you, senior sister. Zhou Tong cupped his fists and smiled meaningfully. You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.